You may not remember this, but there was a time when the world had no shape, no sky, no earth, and no people, whispering old stories into the night. It was a time before time, in a place that wasn't quite a place yet. But if you listen carefully, now, drifting gently toward sleep, I'll tell you about it slowly, calmly, the way stories used to be told when the night was long and the fires were low. Today, we're diving into the entire story of Norse myth to fall asleep to. Before we begin this slow, soothing journey through history, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now where you are. It's always lovely to imagine everyone tuning in from different corners of the globe, drifting off together into the gentle embrace of historical curiosity. Let's get started. In the beginning, there was nothing but Ginnungagap. It stretched endlessly, a great, yawning void, quiet, cold, and patient. Not dark exactly, because there wasn't even light or shadow yet, just empty. It existed between two extremes, the realms of fire and ice, and for what may have been eternity, nothing happened at all. To the north of this great emptiness lay Niflheim, a land of ice, mist, and frost. It wasn't much to look at, not that there was anyone to look, but it was there, solid, frozen, heavy with rime and fog. Geysers of cold vapor hissed from its heart, and icy rivers called the Ylvager drifted silently into the void. You might imagine them frozen solid, but these rivers trickled and oozed, their bitter waters pooling and hardening as they traveled outward into the yawning nothing. To the south of Ginnungagap burned Muspelheim. It was a realm of fire, glowing embers, and unbearable heat. Unlike Niflheim's cold silence, Muspelheim cracked and roared with flame. The sparks leaped endlessly, carried on winds that had nowhere to go. Even though no living thing existed yet, the fire danced in anticipation, restless, waiting, and so it was to the north, fire to the south, and between them, nothing, for a very, very long time. But nothing stays nothing forever. Where the rivers of Niflheim drifted outward, they began to meet the faintest breath of heat from Muspelheim. It wasn't much, at first a whisper of warmth, a ghost of fire reaching across the void. Yet when ice meets fire, even in the smallest amounts, something must change. The ancient ice melted, drop by drop, quietly, as though the void itself began to weep. And from these first drops, life stirred. That life took the form of Ymir, the first of the frost giants, But Ymir wasn't born in the usual way you might picture life, arriving like a child carried, or an egg hatching. No, Ymir simply appeared, grown, vast, and heavy, formed from the mingling of fire and ice. You can imagine him there, enormous, his breath slow and heavy in the silence. His body was rough and damp, with melted rime. His eyes slowly opened to a world of nothing. No stars, no earth beneath his feet, no sound beyond his own steady breathing. For a long time, that was all there was. Just Ymir, the endless void, and the subtle, patient collision of fire and ice that had made him. But Ymir was not alone for long. The melted ice didn't only birth the great frost giant. From the same mingling, another form emerged, Audhumla, the primeval cow. It's not the most heroic beginning, I'll grant you, but this story isn't about heroes yet. It's about what came before. Audhumla was vast, her flanks heavy with frost. her horns curling like glaciers caught in an endless winter. From her udders flowed for rivers of milk rich, nourishing, and entirely necessary, considering Ymir had appeared without so much as a garden or a fruit tree in sight. Ymir drank from Audhumla, and his strength grew in time from the sweat of Ymir's body as he slept. More beings appeared, giants, vast and stubborn, formed from his flesh and moisture. These were the ancestors of the frost giants, fierce and ancient, though for now they had little to do but exist waiting, perhaps, for the world to change. Meanwhile, Audhumla licked the ice that still remained near Niflheim's borders. Day after day, patient and methodical, her great tongue wore away the frost, and beneath the ice something new took shape. First, a head, then shoulders, arms, a face, eyes still closed in sleep. Slowly, as though time itself had to pause and observe, a man emerged from the ice. His name was Buri, and though he said nothing at first, his arrival marked the beginning of what would someday be known as the gods. Ymir, of course, watched all this unfold. One might wonder what he thought of these smaller, stranger beings, Buri, and watchful, and the slow-growing clans of giants sprouting from Ymir's own sweat. But Ymir was ancient, primal, more a force than a man. His thoughts, if he had them, drifted slowly, like glacial ice, across the still-forming world. Buri, for his part, had a son named Bor, and Bor eventually fathered 3 sons of his own, Odin, Vili, and Vi. These 3 would change everything. But not yet. At this point in the story, the world was still half-formed. The ice crackled faintly in the distance. Sparks from Muspelheim still danced on unseen winds. Ymir slept and awoke in turns, his enormous breath stirring the air. No stars, no sun, no sky, just the void, the ice, the firond, the slow, inevitable progression of creation. It's curious to imagine those early days, so quiet, so slow. Not the grand battles or heroic sagas the old bards like to shout about. Just the slow grinding of ice against fire. The faint drip of water as worlds began to take shape. A cow licking ice, a giant breathing. A man emerging slowly from frozen rime, and all of it unnoticed, unhurried. But something was changing. The sons of Borodin, Vili and Vi, were growing. They would soon look upon Ymir and the unformed void, and they would make a decision that could never be undone. But that is for later. For now, let your mind drift to that silent, half-born world. Feel the slow pulse of creation, the patient churn of ice, fire, and emptiness, and wonder. What exactly did Odin see that made him decide the old world had to end? The world as we know it tore, as those old Norse storytellers knew, it was not born from gentle hands or quiet words. It came from something far stranger. You see, the sons of Borodon, Vili, and Vi did not grow up in a neat, orderly world filled with green fields and sunny skies. No, they opened their eyes in the strange, unfinished expanse of Ginnungagap, a place still caught between fire and ice, between nothing and becoming. They were not gods yet, not truly, but they were powerful, curious, and restless. Born from Buri's line, first beings, not shaped by frost or flame alone, but by the potential of something more. It's difficult to say how long they simply watched. The vast body of Ymir sprawled across the empty plains. His enormous chest rose and fell as he slept. The lesser giants wandered, their language rough, their lives primitive and slow. The old cow Audhumla continued to lick the remaining ice, though little new emerged now. The void was quiet again, but not peaceful. You can imagine the young brothers standing together, Odin, with sharp, calculating eyes, Vili, quieter, thoughtful, V, the youngest, more impulsive perhaps, but bold. They must have spoken quietly at first. There are no old scrolls or stone carvings to tell us the exact words, but the old sagas tell us their thoughts. The world could not stay like this, half-born, silent, unformed. They saw Ymir, their distant ancestor, their strange, monstrous forerunner, and they understood, from him, something new could be made. But it would not happen gently, and so, in the vast quiet of Ginnungagap, they acted. The old tales do not glamorize it. Killing Ymir was not a glorious battle, with horns blaring and fire streaking the sky. It was brutal, necessary, and strange. A task that changed the course of everything, but began as quietly as water eroding stone. The brothers attacked Ymir as he slept. It wasn't easy. His size was unimaginable, his flesh thick and ancient as the first ice. But together they struck, siding, pulling, breaking apart the old giant's body. From Ymir's corpse, the world itself was fashioned. His blood flowed out in great torrents, drowning many of the frost giants, washing them away into the emptiness. The Ylvagar rivers carried his blood further, creating oceans, lakes, and streams that would later shape the lands of Midgard. His flesh became the solid ground, the soil, the earth beneath the future feet of men and gods alike. His bones, heavy and strong, were shaped into mountains, jagged peaks that scraped the newborn sky, quiet sentinels to a brutal beginning. His teeth and broken fragments of bone became rocks, boulders, and cliffs, and his enormous skull was lifted by Odin, Vili, and V, placed high above, supported at the four corners by dwarves, strange, subterranean beings who would later master metal and stone. They held the skull aloft, and it became the sky itself. The brains of Ymir, once silent within his massive head, were thrown into the air, and from them the clouds formed, drifting, gray, quiet reminders of what the world had been made from. Even the sparks from Muspelheim, carried on the ancient winds, were gathered and placed into the sky. They became the stars, the sun, the moon's small fires, burning in the cold dark, giving light to what had been empty. And so, the 9 realms began to take shape. In the center lay Midgard, the world of men built from Ymir's remains, encircled by a vast ocean. Around it, the other realms formed, like branches or circles spinning outward. Asgard, high and shining, where the gods would make their home. Vanaheim, where the Vanir would dwell, distant cousins to the Aesir gods. Alfheim, land of the light elves, beings both mysterious and distant. Jotunheim, wild and rugged, where the surviving frost giants retreated. Svartalfheim, deep below, home of dwarves crafting wonders in the dark. Niflheim, still icy and silent, where death whispered softly. Muspelheim, ever burning, where the fire giants waited. And Helheim, the shadowed realm of the dead. Far below, but even as the world took form, it was incomplete. The new earth was raw, cold in places, scorched in others. Mountains rose, sharp and jagged. Oceans churned with bitter salt. The sky hung heavy but quiet, and for a time the brothers simply watched. You can almost picture them, standing at the edge of what they had made. Not proud, exactly, but thoughtful. It was not perfect. It was not finished. But it was something yet. From the blood and bones of Ymir, from the sparks and clouds, the world had emerged. The remaining frost giants, the Ginnungagap, fled to the edges of creation. They did not forget what the brothers had done. In time, they would bear resentment, anger, and plots of revenge. But for now, they retreated to Jotunheim, their realm beyond the sea. Odin, Vili, and V, looking out at the new world, understood something else. Creation is only half the task. The other half is filling the world with life, meaning, and order. But before they could build, before they could claim their role as gods, they needed to solve one more problem themselves. They were not yet divine in the way we later remember. They had power, yes, but they lacked knowledge, wisdom, understanding of fate and consequence that would change soon. The brothers looked down upon their half-formed world. In the quiet forests along the coast of Midgard, driftwood had washed ashore. 2 pale logs, worn by the salt sea, stripped of bark, lying forgotten among the stones. Odin approached first, with care. He lifted the first log and breathed life into it. Vili gave the figure consciousness, thought, and movement. V shaped the body, granting speech, hearing, and sight. The 2 pieces of wood became the first humans, the man they named Ask, the woman they named Embla. Might expect their first moments to be grand or filled with firelight and song, but in truth, it was likely quiet. The 2 stood, blinking at the world bare, uncertain, curious. They had no clothes yet, no language, just breath, thought, and the faint stirrings of awareness. It was simple, boring even. But that's how most beginnings are. Odin, Vili, and V watched them for a moment, then built a home for humankind, Midgard. Encircled by the sea, protected by the gods, the 9 realms stretched outward, layered and vast. The sun burned, the stars shone, the clouds drifted in silence. But Ymir's death had consequences. Creation always does. The surviving giants whispered in their distant land, their resentment growing. The fire giants still paced in Muspelheim, restless, watching the edges of the world with smoldering eyes. Even hell, the realm of the dead, stirred faintly, its gates awaiting the souls yet to come. And Odin, though powerful, understood this. A world born from violence cannot remain peaceful for long. But what choice was there? The world was made. The first humans walked its shores. The sky hung above, heavy with stars, and yet, beneath the surface, the old tensions simmered. Creation is never the end of the story. It's only the beginning, and one day, the quiet world they had made would begin to break apart. But for now, let your mind drift to that quiet new world, the salt wind over empty shores. The sky stretched high with drifting clouds, and the quiet promise that everything was still, unfinished, and wonder. What price did Odin pay for knowledge, and why was he willing to risk everything to obtain it? The world was made, and yet it wasn't finished. Odin, Vili, and V had shaped the earth from Ymir's bones, set the stars in the sky, lifted the clouds, and given life to humankind. But even then, something gnawed at the edges of Odin's thoughts. The world was orderly enough, but not understood. And a world that isn't understood cannot be controlled. It cannot be protected. It cannot last. You can imagine Odin standing on the quiet hills of Midgard, the sea wind ruffling his cloak, his one good eye turned skyward. The other eye, well, that's part of the story. A detail often mentioned, but rarely explained in full. With all its quiet, unsettling implications, the gods had power, but they lacked wisdom. The frost giants, bitter and proud, still roamed Jotunheim. The fire giants smoldered in Muspelheim, silent but watchful. The world, for all its beauty, teetered on a fragile balance, and Odin, even then, could sense the undercurrent of tension. But knowledge could change everything. There was one place where that knowledge could be found, a quiet, forgotten corner of the cosmos, far from the shining halls of Asgard or the wild forests of Midgard, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil the great world tree that now linked the 9 realms. There lay a hidden well. Mimir's well was no ordinary being, a guardian of secrets, a keeper of wisdom so deep and ancient it could drown the mind. His well was filled with waters that reflected not the present, but the hidden truths, the forgotten past, the quiet threads of fate, and the whisper of things yet to come. But Mimir was cautious. His knowledge was not freely given. It came at a cost. Odin understood this, but still, he came. You can imagine the journey long, quiet, steady. Odin alone, walking through realms still raw and forming. His footsteps carried him along rocky shores, across frozen plains, beneath the budding branches of Yggdrasil. The world tree pulsed faintly with life, its roots twisting deep into the fabric of reality, and there, beneath its roots, Mimir's well shimmered in the quiet gloom. Mimir himself waited, silent and watchful, his face weathered with age and knowledge, his eyes sharp, as though he saw far beyond the moment. Odin approached, and with calm, steady words, made his request. Wisdom, sight beyond sight, the understanding of fate, of the gods, of the fragile balance of the world. Mimir listened, then nodded. But knowledge is never free. If Odin wished to drink from the well of wisdom, he would have to sacrifice his eye, not both, just one. A small price, you might think. But consider this. Vision defines us. To see the world clearly, to perceive danger, beauty, the quiet shifting of the world. These things depend on both eyes working in unison. To give one up is not simply to lose depth or symmetry. It is to accept a permanent flaw, visible, unavoidable reminder of the price you paid. Odin, without hesitation, agreed. The old stories often skip the details, but if you let your mind settle, you can picture it, the quiet, steady moment when Odin reached for his eye, when pain flared, sharp and undeniable. As the eye was removed, the world blurred, depth shifted. But beyond the pain, something else opened within him. He drank from Mimir's well, and with each sip, knowledge poured into him, slow, overwhelming, vast. He saw the birth of the world, the grinding of ice against fire, the shaping of Ymir's body, the driftwood on the shore that became Ask and Embla. He saw the giants in their hidden lands, brooding, plotting, ancient as stone. He saw the fragile threads of fate, the web that connected gods, giants, humans, elves, dwarves, and all things, spiraling outward from the roots of Yggdrasil. But with knowledge came burden. Odin saw the future, not all of it. The The future is a shifting thing, like mist over cold water. But he saw enough. Ragnarök, the quiet, inevitable unraveling of the world. The gods would fall, the giants would rise, fire would sweep the earth, the great serpent would stir in the depths, and even the mighty Yggdrasil would shudder. Odin stood at the well's edge, his socket empty, his good eye sharp, and understood. The world he had helped build, the world formed from Ymir's body, would not last, but he also understood something more subtle, more significant. The end was inevitable, but what they did before that mattered. It was not about avoiding fate, it was about preparing for it. Knowledge was the first step from that day. Odin carried the weight of wisdom, the burden of foresight, and the quiet acceptance that all things must eventually end. But he did not retreat, returning to Asgard. To the new, shining halls of the gods, he began to prepare. He gathered allies, the other Aesir, the Vanir, beings of strength and cunning. He watched the frost giants, wary of their resentment. He studied the realms, weaving quiet plans, and he walked the world, often alone, seeking hidden truths, forgotten, unaware of the distant, watchful eye of the gods. The dwarves shaped their halls beneath the earth, their hammers striking, sparks in the gloom. The light elves danced in distant realms, their laughter faint as wind through leaves. And Odin waited, learned, and prepared. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost feel that old, quiet tension beneath the surface of the world, the hum of fate, the threads pulling taut, the inevitability of endings. But endings are not today, for now. The world stands, the 9 realms spin, the stars burn, and somewhere, Odin watches with one eye and with all the quiet, hard-won wisdom of the ages. The world was made from a giant's body, shaped by sacrifice, held together by knowledge, by planning, by quiet, stubborn defiance in the face of fate. But ask yourself this: if even the gods cannot escape their fate, what chance do the rest of us have? The stories of gods are often told with thunder and lightning, with grand battles and fiery speeches. But the truth, the quieter, slower truth, is that power isn't always won with a sword. Sometimes it's earned by walking, just walking, step after quiet step, across cold plains and empty forests, through distant realms that no one else dared to visit. That is how Odin became, well, Odin, after the world was made from Ymir's body, and after Odin gave up his eye for wisdom at Mimir's well. You might think he settled into his role comfortably, the wise All-Father, ruling Asgard with confidence, surrounded by shining halls and loyal gods. But that came later. First, there was walking. Odin understood something that the other gods, even his brothers, Vili and Ve, didn't fully grasp. Knowledge isn't found sitting on a throne. It's found in forgotten places, caves, swamps, mountaintops, and at the edges of the known world. So, he walked. It wasn't glamorous. There were no grand parades, no soaring music, just the sound of his boots on dirt, the quiet creak of leather, and the faint rustle of the wind through endless trees. He walked beyond Asgard, beyond Midgard, into realms most would never set foot. The 9 realms, after all, weren't conveniently arranged like a tidy village square. They sprawled, twisted, connected in ways that defied simple maps. Forests bled into shadowed realms. Mountains touched the edges of other worlds. You could lose days walking in a straight line and find yourself in an entirely different plane of existence. Odin wandered them all. He visited Alfheim, where the light elves lived, tall, distant, always watching with quiet eyes. They whispered secrets of the old magic, of forgotten songs, woven into the fabric of the world. But they offered little beyond riddles and half-answers. Odin listened anyway. He journeyed to Svartalfheim, deep beneath the earth, where the dwarves hammered gold, iron, and secrets into shape. The halls echoed with the ring of hammers, the hiss of molten metal, the low murmurs of craftsmen arguing over contracts. Odin traded words for knowledge, careful, deliberate, always watching. The dwarves, clever as they were, respected bargains, but they distrusted gods. Odin, with his missing eye and quiet questions, unsettled them. But they spoke, eventually, of ancient ores, of the bones of the world, of how even stone remembers. His path took him to Jotunheimtha, land of the frost giants. The giants remembered Ymir. They remembered how Odin and his brothers carved the world from their ancestors' flesh. Their resentment ran deep as mountain roots. Odin did not come boasting. He did not wave weapons or proclaim victory. He came quietly, alone, one eye sharp and watchful, his cloak drawn tight against the cold. The frost giants, for all their size and anger, valued wisdom. They told stories older than the stars, passed down in guttural chants around fire pits carved from ice. Odin listened to them, learned their words, understood their grudges. It was here that he first heard of the runes, not the simple carvings on stone or bone that decorated villages. The real runes, the ancient symbols hidden beneath the skin of the world. The language that shaped fate itself. But the runes were not easily given. They were old. Older than Ymir. Older, perhaps, than the 9 realms themselves. To know them required sacrifice. But sacrifice was something Odin understood better than most. So, after wandering, after listening, after piecing together scraps of forgotten lore, from elves, dwarves, and giants, he returned to Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Yggdrasil stretched through all things, its roots tangled deep in forgotten realms, its branches touching stars, its trunk steady and vast as the world itself, and Odin climbed it. The sagas often skip the small details. They like to leap straight to the end, to the image of Odin hanging from the tree, bleeding, staring down into the abyss. But before that, he climbed. It wasn't easy. The bark was rough, the wind howled, the branches stretched impossibly high. Time warped among the leaves. Days passed like minutes. Minutes stretched into weeks. But Odin climbed higher and higher, until the stars blurred, until the 9 realms stretched beneath him like distant islands, and there, in the quiet hush above, the world he prepared for what had to come next, to understand the runes, to master the hidden language of fate. He had to offer himself, the others, the Aesir, the Vanir. Even the frost giants might have called him mad, but knowledge demands payment, and so, calmly, with steady hands, Odin fashioned a noose from his cloak and hung himself upon the world tree. For 9 days and 9 nights, he hung, that the sagas make it sound noble, dramatic. It was long and boring. The wind whispered, the stars drifted, the tree creaked faintly. Odin bled, and still he hung for 9 long days. The world passed beneath him the 9 realms, spinning slowly, unaware or uninterested in the god who dangled above them. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't violent. It was patient, and that patience changed everything. On the 9th day, the runes revealed themselves. They were not spoken aloud. No grand voice declared their arrival. They appeared etched faintly into the fabric of the world, symbols that shaped language, magic, fate, and the quiet currents beneath reality. Odin saw them, understood them, and with that, he fell released from the noose, landing lightly upon the roots of Yggdrasil once more. He was changed, not stronger. Exactly not more feared, but knowing the runes became his, the language of fate, the quiet, hidden script that shapes what can and cannot be. And so, Odin walked again through realms and shadows, across stones and stars, carrying that quiet, heavy knowledge with him. The others saw him differently now. The Aesir whispered of his wisdom. The giants watched him warily. The dwarves spoke of contracts rewritten, and the humans, they told stories, but those stories focused on the grand, the loud, the final results. They rarely speak of the long, slow walks, of the quiet patience, of the days spent listening to dwarves argue over metal, or giants chanting old grudges by firelight. But you know now, Odin's power wasn't forged in fire or battle. It was earned step by quiet step, through long walks, hard bargains, and the willingness to sacrifice, again and again. But even with the runes, with knowledge earned at such great cost, one quiet truth remained. Even gods don't know everything. The runes gave Odin knowledge, but not peace. They whispered of magic and fate, yes, but not the quiet, full picture that Odin craved. For all his wandering, all his sacrifices, the world still held corners beyond even his understanding, and that unsettled him. You see, knowledge, once tasted, breeds hunger. The more Odin learned, the more he understood how much remained hidden, forgotten, buried beneath the surface of the 9 realms, waiting in the shadows, ignored by gods too proud to look or too fearful to listen. But Odin wasn't afraid. He was patient. And so, once more, the one-eyed wanderer took to the road. This time, his path led down, beneath the shining halls of Asgard, beyond the forests of Midgard, under the deep, cracked bones of the world. There, among the tangled roots of Yggdrasil, lay Helheim, the realm of the dead. Now, don't picture fire and brimstone, or demons gnashing. Their teeth. Helheim was quieter than that. Cold, yes, silent, mostly. A place of shadows and forgotten souls. The dead drifted. There those who died of old age, of sickness, of misfortune, people whose lives were neither heroic enough for Valhalla, nor wicked enough for punishment elsewhere. And ruling over them, Hel, the daughter of Loki, half beautiful, half dead, her skin a contrast of pale flesh and withered decay. She was no villain, not truly, but she was a keeper of boundaries, the quiet, patient administrator of the dead, and her realm was filled with whispers, the kind Odin could not resist. You see, the dead remember things the living forget. They carry secrets, regrets, warnings, knowledge sealed away, not lost, merely waiting. But Hel did not open her gates lightly. Odin, of course, came prepared. No armies, no weapons, just words. He stood at the threshold of Helheim, wrapped in his dark cloak, his single eye glinting in the faint, cold light, and he bargained. It wasn't the first time the ruler of the dead had heard requests. Most begged for loved ones returned, for second chances, for mercy. But Odin wanted none of that. He wanted to listen. The request was unusual enough to amuse Hel. And so, the gates opened. Within, Helheim stretched in quiet grays and shadows. The ground was cold stone, the sky low and heavy, the air thick with the soft murmur of forgotten voices. The dead, for the most part, ignored him. They drifted, quiet as mist, caught in their own memories and unfinished thoughts. But Odin listened for days, perhaps weeks. It's hard to measure time in Helheim. He wandered the quiet realm, his footsteps echoing softly, his ear tuned to the whispers. What did he hear? Not grand prophecies, not the clash of heroes or the roar of Ragnarök, just fragments, old names, forgotten places, warnings buried in casual words. It was dull in its way. A god walking among the dead, eavesdropping like an old man at a market. But those fragments, they mattered. Piece by piece, Odin gathered them. The location of ancient, hidden places beneath Midgard. The whispers of old giants planning in Jotunheim. Hints of magic lost before the sun first rose. And most troubling murmurs of a serpent vast, coiled in the depths, growing, waiting. Jarmungandr, the world serpent, born of Loki, fated to circle the world, fated to clash with the gods at Ragnarök. The dead feared him, but they also understood him. Odin, notebook of the mind, filling with fragments, stored it all away, and then he left. Hel watched him go, quiet, curious, perhaps a little amused. The Allfather had what he came for, not complete knowledge, but more pieces of the endless, tedious puzzle that was the 9 realms. He returned to Asgard, to the halls of the gods. The Aesir, bright and proud, drank mead and sang songs. They whispered of Odin's wanderings, some admiring, some uneasy. But Odin did not explain. Instead, he planned. He sketched maps of hidden places no other god had walked. He traced runes in the quiet corners of his halls. He sent ravens hugging and Munin out into the world, eyes and ears beyond himself. The birds returned daily, carrying news, rumors, and more fragments, and always Odin listened, not to the loud speeches of warriors, not to the grand declarations of the gods, but to the quiet voices, the overlooked, the forgotten, the dead. He understood something simple, yet profound. The truth is rarely shouted. It whispers in the roots of trees, in the halls of the dead, in the quiet corners of forgotten realms. And if you're patient enough, if you're willing to walk far enough, the world gives up its secrets. Odin was willing. But even as his knowledge grew, so did the shadows at the edges of the world, the serpent in the sea, the giants watching with wary eyes, the threads of fate pulled taut, hidden beneath even his vast understanding. Odin knew much, but not everything, not yet. The dead had whispered of more, a place older than even Yggdrasil, a well hidden beneath time itself, where fate was spun, where even the gods were bound, where the Norns, the weavers of destiny, waited. But that was a journey for another day. For now, Odin stood beneath the stars of Asgard, his eye sharp, his mind heavy with gathered knowledge. And in the quiet, endless hum of the 9 realms, he wondered, how far must one walk to truly understand everything? Odin had walked far, across realms, beneath mountains, through the shadows of Helheim, into the deep, tangled roots of Yggdrasil itself. He had given up his eye for wisdom, hung himself upon the world tree to master the runes, listened to the dead whisper forgotten truths, and still the world kept its deepest secrets tucked away. There was one more place, one older than even the gods remembered. Older, some said, than Ymir's bones, or the fire of Muspelheim, at the base of Yggdrasil, beneath soil untouched by time, lay the well of Ord, the well where the Norns dwell. The Norns, the weavers of fate. They weren't gods in the way Odin or Thor were, nor were they spirits or mere shadows. They were something other, ancient, quiet, patient. Their names drifted through the old stories, Ord, Verdandi, Skuld, past, present, future, together. They wove the threads of fate not just for gods, but for all things. Mortal lives, the rise and fall of empires, the quiet growth of trees, even the death of stars. Odin needed to speak with them, but they did not grant audiences easily. The well of Ord lay far below the realms, tangled in Yggdrasil's deepest roots. No grand road led there, no shimmering bifrost to carry him, only walking dot. And so, Odin walked through forests where time curled strangely around the edges, across plains where the grass whispered forgotten names, beneath hills where the bones of old giants slumbered beneath moss and stone. The journey was long, lonely, boring at times, but Odin was patient. Eventually, the world thinned, the air grew still, the ground beneath his feet softened into earth older than memory itself, and there, nestled among the gnarled roots of Yggdrasil, shrouded in mist, lay the well of Uardi. It wasn't grand, no towering pillars, no golden gates, just water still deep, reflecting not the sky above, but possibility, a quiet shimmer of what was, what is, and what may yet be. Beside it, the Norns, three figures, Ord, her hair silver with age, her eyes deep with the weight of all that has passed. Verdandi, her face steady, focused, fingers working the threads of the present moment. Skuld, the youngest, her gaze distant, resting always on what approaches, inevitable and unseen. They did not look up as Odin approached, but they knew he was there. The threads between them twisted and wove, binding reality in quiet, steady loops. Odin spoke. He asked not for favors, nor begged for mercy. He asked to understand, to see the shape of fate as they saw it, to grasp, even briefly, the quiet workings that governed gods and mortals alike. The Norns said nothing at first. Time passed. The threads wove. Odin waited. Eventually, Ord spoke, her voice dry as wind over old stones. Understanding is not granted, Allfather. It is accepted. Slowly, Odin, patient, remained. The Norns, weaving still, showed him pieces, visions, not the grand, shining images the poets favored, but quiet fragments, a tree growing in silence for centuries, only to fall in a forgotten storm, a child's birth, shaping generations beyond the knowledge of their village, the slow erosion of mountains, the quiet rise of fire in Muspelheim, a serpent, coiled, growing, a wolf pacing in shadow, a twilight sky heavy with ash. Odin saw Ragnarök again, but also, beyond it, life rebuilding, the threads tangled, frayed, cut, and rewoven, the lesson was clear. Though no words were spoken, fate is not a straight line. It curls, loops, breaks, and begins again. Odin, wise as he had become, understood something simple and quietly terrible. Even gods cannot control fate. They can walk, they can listen, they can bargain and sacrifice and learn, but the threads spin on still. Knowledge mattered. Even incomplete understanding was a weapon, or a shield. The Norns offered no more. Odin bowed, not out of weakness, but out of quiet respect for the patience of the world. Then he left. The journey back was slow, the world heavy with its old noises, the rustle of forests, the quiet hum of rivers, the faint chatter of distant lives. Odin returned to Asgard. His steps were steady, his mind heavier than before. The others, Thor with his booming laughter, Frigg with her distant, knowing gaze, Loki with his sly half-smile watched him. They asked nothing, but they saw it in him, the quiet exhaustion, the patience, the acceptance. Odin had walked far, listened longer, sacrificed more than most could bear. And what had he learned? Not everything, never everything, but enough, enough to prepare, enough to watch the edges of the world, where giants stirred, enough to listen for the serpent beneath the sea, enough to trace the runes in the quiet hours, weaving protections few could even perceive. Enough to know that fate, however tangled, however inevitable, was still worth walking toward. The other gods might drink and boast, but Odin walked and always listened. And now, as you lie quietly, drifting toward sleep, you might wonder too if the wisest god still walks the world seeking answers. How long would it take the rest of us to truly understand it all? When people tell the stories of Norse mythology, the loud names come first. Odin, with his missing eye and endless wisdom. Thor, hammer in hand, charging into battle. Loki, weaving lies as easily as others breathe. But there's another name, quieter, older, steady as the evening sky. Frigg, goddess of foresight, protector of home and hearth. Wife of Odin, mother of Balder, and more importantly than the poets like to admit them, one who waited. Frigg wasn't the type to shout over a feast hall or ride into war with lightning in her eyes. Her power was subtler, woven into the quiet rhythms of daily life. In many ways, hers was the most boring job among the gods, but perhaps also the most important. Her days began, much like any other in Asgard, with quiet chores. Even gods, those beings of strength, magic, and immortality, had daily routines. The golden halls of Asgard did not clean themselves. The threads of fate did not untangle on their own. Frigg managed it all, while Odin wandered the realms, chasing whispers and knowledge. Frigg stayed. She kept the great hall of Fensalir, her personal dwelling, in order, a place of calm, tucked away from the boisterous halls of Valhalla. Fensalir was not grand in the way some imagined. No towering spires or endless riches, just warmth. Quiet tapestries hung from the walls, woven with scenes of the 9 realms. Fires burned low and steady. The floors swept clean, a place to breathe. It was in these small, steady moments that Frigg ruled her domain. She was not queen of the battlefield, but queen of waiting. Waiting for Odin to return from his endless walks, waiting for news from the far corners of the realms, waiting, always with quiet patience, for fate to play its hand. Frigg saw more than she spoke of. The gift of foresight was hers, not perfect, not complete, but sharper than most. She could sense the quiet turnings beneath the surface of the world, the subtle hints of joy, sorrow, and inevitable endings. But knowing the future rarely made it easier to bear. Still, she did what needed doing. The other gods respected her, though few understood her. Sif, with her golden hair, tended to the harvests. Freya, proud and fiery, tangled herself in love and war alike. But Frigg watched, Frigg listened. Frigg kept the fires burning. Even the all-seeing ravens of Odin, Hugin and Munin, brought her whispers from distant lands. She knew where her husband wandered. She knew when Thor was off chasing giants. She knew when Loki was being Loki, but her concern always returned home. Her son, Baldr, the Shining One, beautiful, bright, beloved by all who saw him, the god of light, of innocence, of quiet joy. Frigg saw his future to dot the quiet shadow at the edges of his fate, the whisper of danger lurking unspoken beneath his perfect life. And so she worked, while others fought or schemed. Frigg wove protections. She traveled the 9 realms not with armies, but with words to the stones. She whispered, asking them not to harm Baldr, to the trees, to the animals, to the earth beneath their feet, to fire and water, metal and sickness, she pleaded. And one by one they agreed. It was a quiet, tedious task. No grand adventures, just countless conversations, promises, small bargains, the sort of work history rarely remembers. But through it, Balder became untouchable, or so she thought. You see, there was one oversight. Not pride, not carelessness, just practicality. The mistletoe, a small, insignificant plant, too young, too soft, too boring to be a threat. Frigg had overlooked it. It was an honest mistake, the kind anyone might make after long hours of tedious work, after days spent weaving fate and tending fires. But fate, as ever, hides in the details. Frigg returned to Asgard, her task complete, or so she believed. Balder thrived. The gods laughed, testing his invincibility. They threw stones, swung swords, lit fires, all bounced harmlessly away from him. It became a game, a source of joy. But beneath it, Frigg waited. She sensed the whisper of the future. She had seen too much, known too much, to rest easy. And sure enough, the shadow lingered in the quiet corners of Asgard. Loki watched. In the forgotten forests, the mistletoe grew, and fate wove on dot. Imagine Frigg as she was, not a warrior, not a trickster, but a woman with quiet eyes, steady hands, and the impossible burden of seeing the future and still choosing to hope. It wasn't grand, it wasn't heroic in the loud, sung-about sense, but it was life. The life of waiting. The life of laundry, of weaving, of listening. The life of quietly protecting what matters. Or the quietest curse of all. The small things often go unnoticed. A pebble on the path, a loose thread in a cloak, a tiny, green plant clinging to the bark of an old tree in the grand halls of Asgard. With their golden roofs and echoing laughter, few bothered with such details. But Frigg usually did. She had spent years, quiet, tedious, patient years, securing her son's future. She had spoken to the fire, the iron, the water, the beasts, every threat to Baldra's life, quieted every danger, bargained away, all but one, the mistletoe. It wasn't pride that made her overlook it. It wasn't forgetfulness, just logic. The mistletoe was young, soft, harmless. It grew in shadows, clinging to other trees like a quiet afterthought. How could such a thing be dangerous? And so the promise wasn't made. It seemed unimportant at the time. Meanwhile, in Asgard, the gods rejoiced in Baldra's invincibility. They threw stones at him, only to watch them bounce away like feathers. They swung swords, lit fires, poured boiling water, all to no effect. It became a sport, a source of endless amusement at the grand feasts. Baldur, patient and smiling, endured it all. He laughed along, shining as only the god of light could, but Frigg watched with a quiet ache in her chest. The more invincible he seemed, the more fragile he felt to her eyes. It's a strange thing, isn't it? The louder the laughter, the sharper the silence beneath it. The more perfect a moment feels, the more we brace for its end. Frigg, with her gift of foresight, understood that too well. And then there was Loki, the trickster, sharp-eyed, restless, forever, drifting at the edges of the feast halls, watching, waiting. While others laughed, Loki observed. He noticed the mistletoe. More importantly, he noticed Frigg's omission. It wasn't difficult to find. A quiet conversation here, a whispered word there. The knowledge slipped into his hands, as most things eventually did. And with it, a plan formed, but not yet. First, patience. Loki waited. Meanwhile, Frigg continued her quiet routines. She swept Fensalir, the soft bristles brushing the floor. She tended the fires. She watched over the threads of fate, knotting them as gently as possible. And beneath it all, that small, nagging worry pulsed like a faint heartbeat. She couldn't see everything. Fate is a tangled thing. Even gods trip over its knots. But she sensed something, a coming change. The quiet before a storm no one else could feel. The days passed, as they always do. Feasts, laughter. The gods showing off their strength. Baldr, glowing, untouchable, beloved. And beneath it all, unnoticed, mistletoe crept along branches. Small and silent, it clung to the world as fate itself does, quiet, patient, inevitable. Then came the day Loki approached Frigg. He disguised himself, of course. A harmless old woman, stooped, quiet, unremarkable. The sort of figure who passes through grand halls without a second glance. Frigg, busy with her weaving, did not see through him at first. They talked harmless things, household duties, weather, the gods' latest antics, and then, casually, the old woman asked about Baldr, about his invincibility, about the promises made, and Frigg answered, not Boastfully, not carelessly, just honestly. She spoke of the stones, the fire, the water, the sicknessal sworn to never harm her son. And then, with a faint, tired smile, she mentioned the mistletoe, too small to worry about, she had thought. A harmless oversight. The old woman, Loki, smiled quietly. The conversation ended. Frigg returned to her tasks, but something inside her twisted. She couldn't explain it. A quiet itch beneath the skin, a whisper in the back of the mind, the knowledge that something had shifted, but life carried on. The gods, oblivious to the growing shadow, prepared for yet another feast. Frigg lit the fires, set the table. No, but knowledge, as Frigg had long understood, is often powerless to stop what must come. Fate is a current. You can brace against it, delay it, soften its edges, but you cannot dam the river forever. And so, the mistletoe grew. Lok carved it, shaped it, crafted from it a weapon so small, so quiet, so unremarkable, no one noticed, but that is the next part of the story. For now, Frigg waited, the fires crackled. The feast began, the laughter rang through Asgard, and in the quiet spaces between the joy, Frigg's worry deepened. She had done all she could, but even goddesses cannot bargain with every shadow. Even goddesses missed the small things, and as you breathe softly now, resting, drifting toward sleep, consider this. How often do the small, quiet oversights change everything? The great hall of Asgard pulsed with music and mead. Gods roared with laughter. The air filled with the clinking of mugs, the thud of footsteps, the buzz of stories retold 100 times over, and in the center, as always, stood Baldr, bright, beautiful, untouchable. The gods hurled spears at him, laughing as they bounced away like harmless twigs. They swung axes, shot arrows, tossed rocks. Nothing left a mark. It had become a game, a celebration of his invincibility, proof that nothing, not stone, nor fire, nor steel, could harm him. But Frigg could not laugh. She watched from the side of the hall, her hands folded, her gaze steady. She had seen this moment before in dreams. Small, overlooked, growing, somewhere patient as time itself. And then Loki arrived. He did not come grandly, no fanfare, no wicked grin, just quiet steps among the revelers, unnoticed as a shadow in Torchlight. At his side, Baldr's brother. Blind, gentle, unwilling to join the game, unable to aim, to throw, to see. And so, Loki offered to help. A gift, a small carved dart, nothing impressive, nothing dangerous at least, to the eyes of the gods. But Frigg felt it. She rose from her seat, her heartbeat heavy, her steps slow, restrained by the weight of inevitability. Before she could speak, before she could reach them, the dart flew, small, quiet, carved from mistletoe. It struck Baldr. The hall fell silent. No echo of laughter, no bounce of harmless wood, just stillness. And then Baldr fell, the invincible god, the shining sun, the beloved, untouchable heart of Asgard, lay lifeless on the stone floor. The gods stared, frozen, their mouths open, words lost. Frigg broke, not loudly. There were no wails, no screams, no grand, shattering collapse, just a quiet, endless grief that settled like fog over her shoulders. The others rushed to Baldr. Cries filled the hall. Accusations, tears, anger. Frigg stood still. She had seen this, known it, worked for years to prevent it, and yet the smallest oversight, the mistletoe, had undone everything. The threads of fate twisted cruelly beneath her fingertips. Even with her foresight, even with her quiet labor, even as the goddess of waiting, of weaving, of watching, she could not stop this. The funeral came. Baldra's body placed upon the grand ship. Ringhorn, the flames lit. The gods wept. The sky darkened. Frigg stood quietly by the shore, her face unreadable, her eyes dry, her hands still, folded over her chest. What more could be done? Loki, of course, vanished. The gods hunted him. Justice was demanded. But Frigg understood. Even vengeance would not undo this. The quiet, tedious work of protecting Balder had been undone not by some grand enemy, but by a plant so small, so forgettable, it was never even feared. And now, the halls of Asgard echoed with absence. The laughter dulled, the shadows deepened. The gods mourned, but Frigg waited. What else could she do? There was still fate to manage, still threads to weave, still fires to tend, homes to care for, futures to quietly, patiently hold together. The others could rage. Frigg endured. She always had, and perhaps always would. There is a particular kind of strength in waiting, in folding laundry while the world unravels, in tending fires while hearts break, in weaving threads while fate snarls at your feet. Frigg knew it well. The world moved on, slowly, awkwardly, grief-stricken, but forward nonetheless, and Frigg remained, weaving, waiting, watching, the goddess of patience, the queen behind the throne, the quiet, unremarkable strength that keeps the world, barely. And as you lie quietly now, drifting deeper into rest, consider, in the end, is it the loud heroes or the quiet ones who truly hold everything in place? Asterisk, if you walk the forests of Midgard, or gaze up at the shining halls of Asgard, it's easy to forget that beneath it all, beneath the roots of the trees, beneath the soil, beneath the bones of the world itself, another realm exists. A realm of stone, smoke, and shadows. Svartalfheim, the home of the dwarves. Now, the stories often paint the dwarves as simple craftsmen, tinkerers, blacksmiths, quiet, unassuming folk tucked away underground, forging weapons for the gods. But the truth is more tedious than that. The dwarves of Svartalfheim didn't just make weapons, they made everything. The chains that bind the mighty Fenrir, the golden hair of Sif, the unbreakable hammer of Thor, the ships, the treasures, the enchanted trinkets that littered the myths, all of them came from the endless forges beneath the world. And it wasn't done with grand heroics or magical chants. It was done with work, long, slow, boring work, and arguments, endless, tedious arguments. Because if there's one thing the dwarves of Svartalfheim love more than crafting, it's contract negotiations. The realm itself reflects their nature. Svartalfheim isn't a shining underground palace. It's a maze of tunnels, workshops, and echoing chambers filled with the clang of hammers and the hiss of molten metal. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of ore. The walls glint faintly with veins of silver and gold, but few stop to admire them, too busy working, debating, forging, correcting mistakes. Among the dwarves, perfection isn't a myth, it's a requirement, and that takes time, lots of time. The gods, of course, are impatient. They descend into Svartalfheim, demanding treasures, weapons, impossible creations, and the dwarves negotiate. They haggle, they argue, they draft contracts thicker than a giant's leg. Every request, every commission, every promise sealed in precise, tedious detail. Take Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, for example. The sagas tell of its forging as a dramatic tale, Loki's trickery. The clever dwarves, Brokkr and Sindri, the final product, gleaming with unstoppable power. But behind that story was paperwork. Thor wanted a weapon that would never fail him. The dwarves wanted fair payment. and protection from lawsuits. Naturally, should the hammer be used irresponsibly. And so, the contracts were drawn. Stipulations about weight, durability, magical enchantments, warranties on the handle, though Loki's interference made it slightly short, much to everyone's frustration. Terms about future maintenance should Thor smash too many giants with it. The process took weeks, not of forging, but of discussion. Meanwhile, in other corners of Svartalfheim, lesser-known dwarves toiled on quieter projects. The chains that bind the wolf, Fenrigleipnir, crafted from impossible materials. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. It sounds fantastical. In truth, it was frustrating, tracking down these ingredients, negotiating with the forces of nature themselves, documenting every step, and once gathered, the process of weaving Gleipnir was uneventful. No explosions, no dramatic music, just careful hands, skilled tools, steady work under flickering torchlight, and at every step, arguments, too tight, too loose, not enchanted enough, overpriced. But in the end, as always, the dwarves delivered. They always do, not because of magic alone, but because of their unyielding, often exasperating, dedication to the craft and the boredom. You see, living underground, surrounded by stone, with little sunlight and fewer distractions, gives one a lot of time to work, a lot of time to perfect, a lot of time to argue. But that is how the 9 realms were quietly held together, not by gods alone, not by giants or heroes, but by the steady, stubborn, work-obsessed dwarves of Svartalfheim. Without them, the gods would lack their weapons, the giants, their tools, the realms, their hidden treasures. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. And as the fires of Svartalfheim burned, and the hammers rang against stone, the dwarves argued, crafted, and quietly shaped the fate of all things, piece by piece, contract by contract. And as you drift toward sleep now, imagine this: how much of the world depends, not on grand battles, but on the quiet, tedious work. No one sings about. The dwarves of Svartalfheim rarely left their forges. They had no time for the antics of gods or the wars of giants. Their world was one of molten metal, chisels, contracts, and arguments that lasted longer than some mortal lifespans. But occasionally, trouble came knocking. More often than not, that trouble had a familiar face. Loki, trickster, schemer, uninvited guest in nearly every realm. And in Svartalfheim, Loki was tolerated. Barely, because while Loki's mouth caused endless problems, it also paid well. You see, gods love treasures. Gods love impossible objects, enchanted weapons, unbreakable chains, golden hair that never fades. And when the gods need these things, they bargain with the dwarves. Loki, naturally, found himself tangled in such dealings more than once. The most famous, the bet. It started, as many things do with Loki, with mischief. A poorly timed prank, Sif's golden hair cut clean off as she slept. Thor, her husband, was unhappy. Thunder cracked. Oaths were sworn. Loki, very nearly, lost his head. To save himself, Loki promised to fix the problem. Not with apologies, but with craftsmanship, the best hair imaginable. Strands of shining gold, finer than silk, that would grow like real hair upon Sif's head. Naturally, only the dwarves could craft such a thing. And so, Loki descended into Svartalfheim, not humbly, not honestly, but with charm, flattery, and a wager. The sons of Ivaldi, master smiths among the dwarves, agreed to the task. They forged the golden hair, but they also, to Loki's delight and mild concern, crafted more Skidbladnir, the ship that could sail anywhere and be folded into a pocket. Gungnir, Odin's spear, unerring and flawless. Loki, ever the opportunist, saw potential, more gifts, more praise, more ways to keep his own head attached to his shoulders, but more risk, too. For deep within Svartalfheim, other smiths toiled. Brokkr and Sindri brothers, fierce, proud, tireless in their pursuit of perfection. Loki provoked them. A bet that they could not craft treasures to rival those of the sons of Ivaldi, that they would fail, that their pride was misplaced. Brokkr, insulted, accepted, and so the fires were stoked. The hammers rang. The quiet, dull work of crafting began. But Loki couldn't help himself. Disguised as a fly, he tried to sabotage their work, buzzing, biting, distracting the brothers as they forged impossible things. First, Gullinbur's Stitha, golden boar, radiant and swift. Then, Draupnir, the golden ring that multiplied itself, a treasure of endless wealth. Finally, the masterpiece, Mjolnir, the hammer destined for Thor, unbreakable, deadly, unstoppable, save for a slight flaw in its handle. Thanks to Loki's interference, the treasures completed, the wager was judged, the gods assembled, the gifts unveiled. Even with the shortened handle, Mjolnir was unmatched. The boar, the ring, the ship, the spear, the golden hair, all wonders. Brokkr and Sindri had proven their skill. Loki had lost. The price, his head. But Loki, clever as ever, pointed out a flaw in the contract. Yes, they could take his head, but the contract said nothing about damaging his neck. The dwarves, begrudgingly bound by their own obsession with contracts, relented. Instead, they sewed Loki's lips shut, temporary, of course, but quiet for a blessed moment. And then, as always, life in Svartalfheim returned to normal. The fires burned, the arguments resumed, the tedious work of holding the 9 realms together continued. The gods, armed with their new treasures, basked in glory. But beneath it, all beneath Asgard, beneath Midgard, beneath the great roots of Yggdrasil, the dwarves remained unseen, uncelebrated, indispensable, because while the gods may fight and boast, it is the quiet work of crafters and the endless patience of contract writers that keeps the world from falling apart. And as you rest now, breathing steady, eyes heavy, consider this: for every hero in a song, how many quiet workers made their story possible? The gods often imagined themselves as the center of everything. Thor with his hammer roaring across the sky. Odin, one eye always watching, always scheming. Freya, shining, fierce, beautiful. But deep beneath their shining halls, the real work never stopped. In Svartalfheim, the dwarves kept building, not for glory, not for songs, but because the world needed them too. And perhaps nowhere was that more obvious than in the tale of Fenrir, the wolf, born of trickery and prophecy, larger than any beast should be, growing, always growing, a threat so vast even the gods feared to speak of it. The stories say the gods tried to bind Fenrir with chains of iron, the first chain broken like thread, the second shattered with ease. The wolf's strength defied every material the gods could muster. So they came to the dwarves, down the winding tunnels of Sportalfheim into the smoke-filled workshops. The gods arrived nervous, impatient, uncertain. They made their demand, a chain, unbreakable, impossible, and the dwarves argued endlessly, not about whether they could do it, they could, but about how to word the contract, how to guarantee fair payment, what protections they would need if the gods tried to avoid fulfilling their end of the bargain. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't exciting, but it was necessary. Once the agreements were inked, the dwarves got to work, and here's where the boring details matter. The chain Gleipnir wasn't made of ordinary things, not iron or steel or magic, but of impossibilities. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, things that by nature don't exist, or exist so quietly no one notices them. Collecting these ingredients wasn't dramatic, it was tedious. Endless calculations, delicate weaving, silent spells muttered over forges that burned hotter than the sun. Days turned to weeks. The gods grew impatient. The dwarves ignored them. Rushing perfection is, after all, the surest path to disaster. And so Gleipnir was born, a ribbon, thin and smooth, soft to the touch, unassuming, yet unbreakable. The gods, skeptical, returned to Fenrir. They offered the ribbon as a challenge. The wolf, wary, agreed only if one of them placed their hand in his jaws as a show of good faith. Tyr, the brave, stepped forward. The chain wrapped around Fenrir. Gleipnir held and Tyr lost his hand. The gods cheered. The wolf raged. The realms held together. But beneath it all, in the forges of Svartalfheim, the dwarves returned to work. Because chains break, treasures tarnish, weapons dull. Asterisk. The world wears down, and it is not gods or giants who mend it, but crafters, smiths, quiet, stubborn workers with soot-streaked faces and ink-stained fingers. They do not seek fame. They do not ask for songs, but without them, nothing lasts. And so, the cycle continues. The gods boast, the giants scheme, the realms fracture, the dwarves rebuild. In the dull glow of the forges, in the endless meetings over contracts, in the quiet, steady work no one sees. And as you drift toward sleep now, eyes heavy, breathing slow, consider, perhaps the world isn't held together by heroes, but by the quiet ones no one notices. The sea is rarely still. It churns, it crashes, it howls with storms and hisses with quiet, creeping fog. And yet, for all its moods, the sea has its quieter moments. Long stretches of calm, gray skies, endless, steady waves. Those moments belong to Njord, god of the sea, of wind, of quiet sailing voyages and favorable trade winds. But Ingard was never the loudest god, nor the most famous. His stories rarely involved great battles or fiery passion. More often, they were about patience, trade, weather, and the quiet, dull parts of life no one celebrates. You see, Njord's domain was vital, but not particularly exciting. Fishermen prayed to him for calm waters, merchants for safe passage, sailors for favorable winds. And when those prayers were answered, nothing dramatic happened. No lightning splitting the sky, no monsters rising from the deep, just a smooth voyage, a boat bobbing gently along. Cargo delivered on time, important, necessary, unremarkable. That in many ways, summed up Ingjerd's life. His origins were older than Asgard itself. He came from the Vanya tribe of gods known for fertility, nature, and uneasy truces with the Aesir. After the long, forgettable war between the Aesir and the Vanya fought mostly over pride and misunderstanding, Stard was sent to Asgard as part of a peace agreement, a diplomatic exchange, a gesture of goodwill, and quietly, a reminder that the Vanir were not to be dismissed. Ingerd settled in well enough. The gods of Asgard, for all their bluster and bravado, understood the value of a steady sea. Trade routes opened, harvests improved, fishermen returned home safely. Ingerd did his job, quietly, efficiently, with little fuss. But like most things in life, his personal life was complicated. For all his calm at sea, Ingerd's marriage was anything but smooth sailing. Enter Skaya, giantess, daughter of Enjazi, a fearsome Jatun known for his boldness and unfortunate habit of kidnapping. Sky, fierce and proud, came to Asgard seeking vengeance after her father's death. But vengeance, as is often the case in the Nine Realms, turned into negotiations. A peace was brokered. Sky reluctantly agreed to marry one of the gods, but not just any god. She would choose her husband by looking only at their feet. An odd custom, certainly, but giants and gods are rarely straightforward. Ingerd, it turns out, had exceptional feet, smooth, shapely, free of dirt or scars, a byproduct of life by the gentle shores rather than on the battlefield. Sky, expecting to choose the handsome Balder, found herself instead married to Ingerd, and thus began what may be one of the most quietly disastrous marriages in all of Norse myth. You see, Ingerd loved the sea, the smell of salt air, the call of gulls, the steady hum of waves against the shore. Sky, she loved the mountains, the snow, the high peaks where the air was sharp and clean, the quiet forests where wolves howled beneath the moon. They tried, for a time, to make it work. First, they lived in Sky's mountain hall, Rimheimer. Ingerd hated it. The howling wolves disturbed his sleep. The biting cold chilled him to the bone. The endless snowfields left him longing for the sound of water. After 9 nights, he couldn't bear it. So, they moved to Ingerd's home by the Cenoten. Sky hated it. The constant cries of gulls grated on her nerves. The dampness settled into her bones. The salty air never left her hair. The gentle lull of waves that soothed Ingerd kept her restless. And so, after much quiet frustration, they agreed to part ways. No dramatic arguments, no shouting matches, just a mutual understanding that sometimes even gods are incompatible. Their marriage became one of distance, polite, detached, bound by the politics of their people, but little else. And Ingerd returned to his steady life, tending the winds, watching the tides, ensuring merchants reached their destinations, and fishermen returned to their families. It wasn't grand, it wasn't tragic, it was ordinary. But in a world of gods and giants, sometimes ordinary is a blessing. And as the years drifted by like the slow current of the sea, Ingerd remained quiet, reliable, essential. In a way no one celebrated, but everyone depended upon. And as you settle now, drifting gently towards sleep, ask yourself, in the stories of great adventures, how often do we forget the ones who quietly keep the world steady beneath the waves? If the gods of Asgard were the loud, boisterous rulers of battle and fate, Ingerd was their quiet accountant. Not literally, of course, but in a realm obsessed with glory. He handled the dull but crucial details: the ships, the trade routes, the fisheries, the subtle negotiations that made everyday life possible. Most gods craved war. Ingerd managed commerce. And while stories rarely sing of treaties or tariffs, they are the fabric that holds the realms together. You see, trade was lifeblood. Even gods needed resources: food, metals, furs, the quiet exchange of goods across oceans and rivers. And Ingerd made it happen. His control over the winds wasn't just for show. Merchants prayed to him before setting sail. Fishermen carved his symbols onto their boats. Even the Aesir, proud and impatient, sought his blessing when diplomatic missions or shipments crossed treacherous seas. With Ingerd, the journeys were smooth. Without him, ships drifted off course, storms rose, and trade suffered. It wasn't exciting, but it was vital. And Ingerd, he preferred it that way. While Thor thundered across the skies and Odin wandered the world seeking wisdom, Ingerd attended quiet council meetings. The Vanir, his people, still watched from afar. The peace with Asgard held, mostly, but it required maintenance. Endless discussions, shared rituals, diplomatic gestures no one celebrated, but everyone relied upon. Ingerd's role was too smooth. Things over. When tempers flared at council tables, Ingerd remained calm. When treaties needed signing, Ingerd ensured every word was clear. When tensions between gods and giants simmered, Ingerd quietly arranged fishing agreements, coastal settlements, neutral waters. It was dull, but effective. Not all gods appreciated his patience. Thor grumbled at bureaucracy. Loki mocked him for being the god of predictable tides and politely worded contracts. Even Odin, ever the schemer, sometimes dismissed Ingerd's methods as too cautious. But when their ships sailed safely, when their harvests arrived intact, their ports bustled with trade, no one questioned him. There were other details, of course. Ingerd's children, for example, Freya and Freyr, born of the Vanir, raised among the Aesir, they carried pieces of both worlds. Freya, the fierce goddess of love, beauty, and quiet power. Freya, the lord of prosperity, kingship, and fertility. Their fame, in many ways, eclipsed Ingerd's songs celebrated Freya's beauty. Sacrifices were made to Freyr for good harvests. But Ingerd stayed behind the scenes, tending the winds, managing the tides, negotiating the dull, crucial details that made it all possible. There's a particular kind of strength in being overlooked. The storms he calmed, forgotten. The trade routes he protected, taken for granted. The peaceful years of steady commerce, blamed on luck rather than labor. But Ingerd never sought recognition. He understood that a well-run world is quiet. No chaos, no drama, just calm waters. Still, there was always tension beneath the surface. His marriage to Skye remained a polite distance. The Vanir alliance, delicate. The seas themselves, unpredictable. And Ingerd, with his steady patience, kept working. Tide after tide, trade after trade, treaty after treaty. No grand battles, no dramatic love affairs, no desperate quests. Just the quiet, necessary work of keeping things afloat. And as you breathe, now, slowly, steadily, Imagine that endless stretch of ocean. Calm, unremarkable, but beneath it, powerful currents. The quiet labor of tides shaping the shores. The kind of strength that asks for no attention. But without it, nothing holds together. And as you drift toward sleep, consider, in every noisy world, how much depends on the quiet, steady hands. No one notices. In the grand halls of Asgard, the loudest gods are remembered best. Thor's hammer, Odin's ravens, Freya's beauty, Loki's tricks. But the sea is patient, and so is Ungerd. Time passed. Seasons changed, wars came and went, but Ungerd remained. He never sought a throne, never led armies, never claimed victories in battle songs. His victories were quieter. A ship arriving safely after weeks at sea. A fisherman returning with his catch, safe from storms. Merchants exchanging goods beneath clear skies. Each success, unremarkable, necessary, easily forgotten. Ungerd aged as gods do not. The quiet diplomacy, the careful tending of winds and tides, his marriage to sky, a polite footnote in the history of gods. They saw each other occasionally, cordially, like distant acquaintances, bound by an old agreement. And the children, Freya and Freyr, rose to prominence, their names carried across the realms, spoken with reverence and awe, endured. As the gods bickered and boasted, Ungerd ensured the ports were busy. As the giants plotted, Ungerd watched the sea routes. As kingdoms rose and fell, Ungerd kept the tides steady. But time, even for gods, brings change. The Vanirasir alliance strained. Old wounds reopened. The 9 realms shifted and endured. He stepped back. Eventually he returned to Vanaheim, the home of his people. A quiet retirement of sorts. No fanfare, no songs, just a departure, like the gentle ebb of the tide. In his absence, the seas still carried his influence. Merchants still prayed to him. Sailors still whispered his name. The winds still listened. Even as Ragnarök loomed, a fate whispered in shadows, promised by seers and girds, steady hand on the sea remained. Because even at the world's end, someone has to hold the line. Someone has to calm the waters, guide the ships, and ensure that, for as long as possible, life carries on. Not all gods crave glory. Some prefer usefulness. And Ungerd was content to be useful. The seas, after all, are not always stormy. They outlast every battle. They carry the world forward, quietly. And as you settle deeper into rest now, drifting softly as if upon a calm tide, remember, the loud ones are remembered, but the quiet ones, they hold everything together. Gods, as you may know, have a reputation for being eternal, ageless, powerful, immune to the slow crawl of time that we mortals feel in our bones. But that's not entirely true. The gods of Asgard, they aren't naturally immortal. They age, they wither, they grow old, or they would've, not for Idun. Idun isn't a warrior. She doesn't wield a mighty hammer or cast spells across the sky. She doesn't command storms or challenge giants to duels. Idun tends fruit, specifically apples. Ordinary looking, small enough to hold in your palm, smooth-skinned, golden. Not the kind you find in a mortal orchard. But neither do they glow, or float, or sing. They simply exist, quietly, patiently, and yet they are the most important thing in Asgard, because without them, the gods grow old, they weaken, their strength fades, their beauty dulls, their power crumbles. It's tedious work tending the apples. Idun knows every tree in her orchard. She knows when the soil needs turning. She knows how much water each root requires. The gods, for all their might, rarely visit her orchard. They simply expect the apples to be there when they need them. They assume their youth, their strength, their glow will never fade. Idun makes sure that happens, quietly, steadily, alone. Few songs mention her, fewer still describe her daily life. No battles, no daring escapes, just apple trees and patience. But the gods depend on her, more than they care to admit, more than most even realize. And perhaps that's why the trouble began. Because power, when unnoticed, is often taken for granted. And those who envy the gods, they look for quiet weaknesses. Enter Yggdrasil, a giant, ambitious, clever, patient in his own way. He understood that to weaken the gods, you didn't need armies, you didn't need weapons, you simply needed Idun. And so the trap was set. It began, as many such tales do, with Loki, the trickster, the wanderer, the god who could not resist a scheme. Loki found himself caught by Yggdrasil in the form of a great eagle. A deal was made, a favor owed the price. Idun and her apples, Loki, cornered and clever, agreed. And so, with smooth words and a practiced smile, Loki led Idun from her orchard, told her there were better apples beyond Asgard's walls, that her work, her quiet tending, was incomplete. Idun, curious, trusting, followed, carrying her basket of golden fruit. And there, beyond the safety of the gods, Yggdrasil swept down, snatched her away, vanished into the distant icy realms of the giants. The orchard, empty. Apples, gone. The gods, vulnerable. It didn't happen instantly. The first days passed without notice. The second, subtle fatigue. The third, aching joints, graying hair, faltering strength. By the end of the week, panic set in. The gods were aging, and for all their pride, all their power, they could do nothing. They searched, they argued, they demanded answers, and all eyes turned to Loki. The trickster's charm faltered. His jokes found no laughter. The gods were aging, and their patience ran thin. Loki confessed. A deal made under duress. A mistake, but mistakes, in Asgard, carry consequences. And so, Loki was sent to fix what he'd broken, to retrieve Idun, to bring back the apples, to restore the quiet, tedious magic that held their youth intact. The journey. That's for another moment. But consider this, the gods, mighty as they are, owe their eternity to a woman with an orchard. To fruit, no one notices until it's gone. To the quiet labor of planting, pruning, harvesting, year after year. There are no grand battles in her story. No thunder, no conquest, only apples, and the patience to care for them. And as you lie still now, listening to the steady rhythm of your breath, imagine how much of the world's greatness depends on quiet, uncelebrated labor. Loki has many talents: trickery, flattery, escaping consequences, at least most of the time. But even the god of mischief has limits. And when the gods of Asgard began to wrinkle, ache, and complain, those limits arrived fast. It turns out, a council of gods losing their youth is a humorless crowd. Odin's sharp glare, Thor's tightening fists, Freya's fading glow, Frigg's quiet disappointment. Only a simple, uncomfortable truth. He had bargained away Idun, and with her, the apples, the gods, youth, their strength, their vanity, their very future. And so, Loki was sent to fix it. No feast, no applause, just an unavoidable task. Retrieve Idun, bring back the apples. Restore what was quietly, crucially missing. It wasn't a heroic quest. There were no banners, no grand speeches, just obligation. But the fate of the gods hung on this quiet rescue. Loki's plan was, naturally, clever, disguise, speed, and just enough nerve to outwit Yggdrasil, the giant who held Idun captive. Transforming into a falcon sleek fast, Sharbid Loki soared across the realms, over mountains, across icy rivers, beyond the comfortable borders of Asgard. Jazi's hall lay nestled in the harsh, jagged reaches of Jotunheim, a fortress of stone and cold, surrounded by towering peaks and treacherous skies. Within, Idun waited, her orchard gone, her apples locked away, her patience tested. But Idun was not panicked. She understood the slow rhythm of things, the steady, inevitable work of restoration. And when Loki arrived, feathers ruffled, breath short, eyes darting, she didn't scold him. She simply agreed to leave. But there was the matter of the apples. Not all of them, of course. She carried a few allays, a quiet precaution, the god's youth tucked neatly in her basket. And so Loki transformed her to a nut, small and unassuming, tucked safely in his talons, the apples hidden within. Then they flew. The journey back was no gentle glide. Yggdrasil, discovering their escape, gave chase. His eagle form darkened the sky, fierce and relentless. Winds howled, clouds churned. The chase stretched across realms. But in Asgard, the gods were prepared. They lit fires, built walls, created a defense of flame and cunning. As Loki neared, wings aching, Yggdrasil close behind, the gods set the final trap. The fires roared, the sky cracked with heat. Loki darted through, Idun safe, the apples secured. Yggdrasil caught in the flames. His wings faltered, his form fell. The giant's pursuit ended in smoke and ash. The gods rejoiced, not with grand feasts or songs, but with quiet relief. Their youth returned, their strength restored, the slow ache of aging reversed, and Idun, she returned to her orchard, her trees, her apples, her quiet, essential work. Loki, of course, reclaimed his reputation, twisting the tale in his favor, omitting certain details, polishing the truth. But among the gods, they knew. It wasn't mischief that saved them. It wasn't strength, or magic, or battles. It was fruit, and patience, and a woman quietly tending to trees no one admired until they were gone. And as you drift toward sleep, steady and calm, consider, how often do we ignore the quiet caretakers until the world begins to wither? Life in Asgard returned to normal, or rather, to what passed for normal among gods. The battles resumed, the boasts grew louder, the petty rivalries flared again, and in the quiet spaces between thunder and swordplay, Idun returned to her orchard. The trees were as they had always been, ordinary to look at, unassuming, but woven into the roots of those trees was the secret of the gods' survival. Idun worked alone. The gods rarely visited. They rarely asked how the apples were grown. or how long the harvests took, or how easily things could go wrong. They assumed, as gods often do, that the apples would always be there, that their youth, their beauty, their power would simply continue. And for a time, they were right. Season after season, Idun cared for her orchard, watered the trees, pruned the branches, watched the fruit ripen under the steady sky. The apples were not immortal. They required care, attention, a steady hand that never tired. Repetitive work, it was, tedious and crucial. The gods never asked how old Idun was, and she never told them. But it is whispered among certain circles that she was older than Asgard itself, older than the walls of the realm, older than the first song sung in the halls of the gods. She had seen empires rise and fall, heroes born and fade into forgotten dust, and still the apples grew. But even Idun knew that nothing lasts forever, not even for gods. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, was a whisper in the roots of Yggdrasil, long before it echoed across the 9 realms. It wasn't a sudden storm, it was inevitable. The gods, for all their strength, could not outrun fate. The wolf Fenrir would break his chains. The serpent Jormungandr would rise from the sea, until the end came. When Ragnarök unfolded, legends say the skies burned, the ground split, the gods fell one by one into oblivion. But the apples survived, hidden, protected, carried beyond the reach of fire and sword. Some stories claim that after Ragnarök, the world began anew. Green fields replaced ash. Clear rivers ran where smoke once choked the land. And among those reborn spaces, an orchard, ordinary trees, golden fruit, and a woman, tending, waiting, planting the seeds of eternity, quietly, patiently. The gods were gone, but the apples endured, because youth is not guaranteed. Strength fades, power slips away. But so long as someone tends the roots, watches the branches, and patiently harvests the fruit, hope remains. It isn't loud, or glorious, or sung of in great halls, but it lasts. And as your breathing slows now, your body sinking into quiet rest, think of those trees, the fruit that kept gods alive, outlived them all. And in the quiet spaces of the world, some things endure, simply because someone cared enough to tend them. Not all wars are fought with swords. Some drag on with negotiations, misunderstandings, and petty insults. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir, it had all of those things. For all their might, the gods can be terribly human. The Aesir were warriors, bold, brash, rulers of Asgard, gods of thunder, war, and glory. The Vanir, more subtle, tied to fertility, nature, wealth, and the quiet rhythms of the earth. 2 tribes of gods, 2 ways of life, and, as it often goes, too much pride on both sides. The details of how the war began are, frankly, dull. There was an insult, an accusation, old grudges bubbling beneath the surface. But what matters is this: the gods, powerful as they were, could not resolve their differences peacefully, so they fought, at least at first. But this wasn't a war of epic battles sung in mead halls. It was awkward. Skirmishes erupted. Sure, shields clashed, arrows flew, but neither side could win decisively. The Vanir's connection to the earth made them resilient. The Aesir's hunger for victory made them relentless. But after years-long, tedious, repetitive years Both sides grew tired. No clear victors, no decisive battles, just attrition. And so they tried diplomacy. Finally, representatives were chosen, agreements drafted, oaths exchanged. But how do proud gods seal a peace that feels fragile with the most tedious, peculiar ritual imaginable? They all spat into a vat. Yes, spit, godly spit. Not exactly the most noble image, but it served a purpose. The combined saliva was a symbol of unity, of shared fate, of gods, quite literally, mixing their essence into one. From that mixture, they created a being, Kvisir, born not of love or desire, but of boredom, negotiation, and the need to avoid more awkward battles. Kvisir wasn't a warrior, nor a schemer. He was knowledge, wisdom, the quiet voice that answered questions no one else could. And so, while the gods returned to their realms, polishing their pride and resuming their routines, Kvisir wandered. He traveled the 9 realms, listened, taught, answered riddles, solved disputes, not with swords or spells, but with words, with insight, with the quiet, steady patience that bored most warriors to tears. And so, the world turned. The war faded into distant memory. The Aesir and Vanir maintained an uneasy peace, and Kefir, he simply wandered. Until, of course, things went wrong. Because in every story, even the quiet ones, someone always wants more. More power, more wisdom, more advantage. The dwarves, Fjalar and Galar, were such individuals, clever, ambitious, unimpressed by warriors and oaths. They saw Kvasir's wisdom not as a gift to the realms, but as a resource, a tool, a shortcut. And so, when Kvasir visited their hall, they welcomed him warmly, listened, nodded, smiled. Then, they killed him, quietly, efficiently. No battles, no drama, just cold calculation. They drained his blood, mixed it with honey, and created the mead of poetry, a drink of impossible power. Those who tasted it would speak with beauty, insight, and brilliance. Poetry, wisdom, inspiration, all condensed into a simple, golden brew. It was, in many ways, the most important accident in Norse myth, a product of boredom, negotiation, murder, and fermentation. And as you lie still now, drifting softly toward sleep, think of Kvisir, born from boredom, killed for ambition, transformed into the quiet power that shapes every clever word spoken since. The mead of poetry wasn't created in glory. It wasn't forged in battle or blessed by shining gods. It came from convenience and greed. The dwarves, Fjalar and Galar, were not poets. They didn't care for flowery words or clever riddles, but they understood value, and Kvasir's blood was valuable. His wisdom, his insight, his calm, measured understanding of the world mixed with honey, it became liquid inspiration, a drink that could turn even the dullest tongue into a master of words, a tool for kings, a shortcut for liars, a treasure for anyone seeking power hidden behind clever speech. But with value comes risk. Fjalar and Galar were not content to share their creation. They hoarded it, guarded it, refused to let it fall into careless hands. That didn't mean they avoided trouble. They angered a giant Suttung, the details tedious, naturally, a dead relative, an argument, an unfortunate series of betrayals. In the end, Suttung took the mead from them, locked it away, deep in a mountain beneath stone and shadow, guarded by his daughter Gunla and the mead. It waited, golden, potent, unreachable. But as with all valuable things, it attracted attention. Odin noticed the Allfather, watcher of the realms, tireless seeker of knowledge, and master of inconvenient curiosity. Odin wanted the mead, not for profit, not for trade, but because words control the world. A well-timed speech, a clever lie, a poem that stirs warriors to battle, a story that shapes kings and gods alike. The mead of poetry wasn't just a drink, it was influence. So, Odin schemed. No armies marched, no battles raged, just patience and tedium. Odin disguised himself as a laborer, worked for Bogi Sutung's brother, endured hard labor, boredom, endless days of chopping, carrying, waiting. For months he toiled. No glory, no songs, just sweat and patience. And then, when trust was earned, when suspicion dulled, Odin struck his bargain. A tiny hole drilled into the mountain, a flash of magic, a falcon's form. A quiet flight into the shadows. Gunla guarded the mead, but Odin charming, patient, calculating won her trust. Some say with words, some say with promises, some with deception. Regardless, the result was the same. Odin drank the mead, all of it, every drop, the words of wisdom, the inspiration of poets, the clever lies of politicians, the songs of skalds, all hidden in his belly. Odin fled, a falcon against the sky. Sutung chased in eagle form, fierce and furious. But Odin's patience paid off. His escape succeeded. The mead returned to Asgard, mostly. A few drops spilled along the way. They say those drops fell to Midgard, to mortals, to the clumsy poets, the half-talented speakers, the wandering bards with more ambition than skill. But the true mead that remained with Odin, stored, guarded, shared, selectively. And so, even today, when a clever speech stirs a crowd, when a poem moves hearts, when a quiet word sways a ruler, it's the mead, the accidental product of bored gods, murdered wisdom, greedy dwarves, and a patient thief, not born of glory, but of tedious negotiations, of betrayal, of fermentation. And as your body relaxes now, your thoughts slowing like the steady flow of honey, consider, inspiration is rarely loud when it begins. It often starts with boredom and ends with quiet power. Today, when poets speak of their gift, they call it inspiration. When rulers deliver rousing speeches, they call it skill. When silver-tongued liars weave convincing tales, they call it cleverness. But in quiet corners of the world, those who truly know, they whisper of the mead of poetry, golden, rare, concocted from the blood of a murdered diplomat and the greed of dwarves, hidden away by giants, stolen by gods, dribbled accidentally onto mortals. And so, even now, it lingers. It isn't evenly distributed. Some people, chosen, lucky, or perhaps touched by fate, speak with a rhythm that holds listeners still. Their words shape ideas. Their verses stir the soul. Their speeches change minds. Others stumble, fumble. Try as they might, their words fall flat, because the mead doesn't touch everyone. But few know how precarious its existence truly was, how the most powerful source of human inspiration began, not with beauty, but with boredom, with gods too proud to share power, with dwarves too greedy to resist opportunity, with a giant too angry to care for consequences, with a thief god patient enough to wait for the right moment, and at the center of it all, Kvasir, a diplomat, born from spit, killed for convenience, transformed into the foundation of art, song, and clever words. Odin, of course, hoarded most of the mead, kept it for the gods, dribbled it onto those few mortals he deemed worthy. But accidents happen. Some of the mead fell into unexpected places, onto unexpected people. A wandering bard, a frustrated scribe, a quiet speaker who never thought they had a voice, and suddenly, a poem, a song, a speech, words that dance, not because of practice alone, but because of ancient, fermented wisdom carried quietly through the veins of history. No armies marched for this, no gods thundered in the sky. The most powerful tool language shaped into art arrived, quietly through spit, murder, and honey. Not glorious, but effective. And so, as your eyes grow heavy, your breath steady and slow, remember, the next time you hear a song that moves you, a poem that lingers, a speech that turns the tide, it likely began in a vat of spit, fermented by accident, preserved by theft, shared by the gods, reluctantly, and like most quiet forces in the world, it remains unseen, but always shaping what comes next. There's something remarkably human about gods arguing over construction deadlines. In the earliest days of Asgard, after the great halls were raised and the throne rooms polished, the gods turned their attention to practical matters, defense, security, boundaries, because even gods, for all their power, worry about trespassers, especially giants. The giants, lurking in the wild, chaotic edges of the 9 realms, were a constant problem, strong, cunning, often offended by the gods' pride. And Asgard, it needed protection, but walls. Walls are tedious. No glory in stone stacking, no songs for carpenters, no feasts for bricklayers. Still, the gods agreed, a wall must be built, high, strong, impenetrable. The problem, none of them wanted to do it. Building walls takes time, effort, a patience that most gods lack. So, when a mysterious builder arrived, offering his services, the gods hesitated. The builder was skilled, clearly, promised a wall like no other, but his price, steep, suspiciously steep. He wanted the sun, the moon, and Freya. Yes, Freya the radiant goddess, desired by all, proud and free. Naturally, the gods balked, but Loki intervened, as he often did. It's impossible, he argued. The deadline, ridiculous. He can't finish in time. Let him try. We lose nothing. The gods, eager to avoid lifting stones themselves, agreed. Terms were set. The builder could use his stallion, but he must finish within a single season, if not, no payment. It seemed safe enough. The builder worked, day and night, stone upon stone, faster than expected. Too fast. The gods watched, uneasy. The wall grew massive, impenetrable. Loki's assurances began to sound hollow. Then they noticed the stallion, Svaelfari, enormous, unnatural strength, hauling stone as if it weighed nothing. Suddenly, the impossible seemed very possible. The wall neared completion. The gods panicked. Freyr frowned. Odin's eye narrowed. Freyr's temper flared. And Loki, cornered, his cleverness once again got them into trouble. And now, it would have to get them out. But how do you stop a builder with a supernatural horse? With patience, negotiation, no, with distraction and chaos. Loki, shifting shape, set his plan in motion, but the details will come to those in time. For now, imagine the half-built wall, the anxious gods, the ticking clock, a construction project turned into a race against time. A mundane task spiraling into myth. And as your body rests, steady and still, consider how many of history's grandest stories began as tedious projects no one wanted to do. The gods of Asgard were many things, proud, powerful, short-tempered, but above all, they were practical when forced to be. As the builder's wall climbed higher, stone by stone, the gods realized they had miscalculated. The builder, with the help of his stallion, Svalfari, was actually going to finish, and that meant the sun, the moon, and Freya. It was, to put it mildly, unacceptable. The gods argued, blamed, panicked, and then, as usual, they turned to Loki. After all, it was Loki who convinced them to accept the deal. It was Loki who assured them the deadline was impossible. And now, it was Loki who had to fix it. The trickster god didn't argue. He didn't deflect. For once, he agreed. But Loki's solutions are never straightforward. To stop the builder, Loki didn't smash stones or cast spells. He targeted the true source of the problem, Svalfari, the stallion. Without the horse, the builder couldn't finish. It was simple, ridiculous, and effective. Loki changed his form, not into a warrior, or a wolf, or a bird. He became a mare, graceful, enticing, irritatingly distracting. When Svalfari spotted the mare Loki's illusion, he abandoned his work. The stallion chased, the builder shouted, the gods watched. Svalfari galloped into the forest, hot on the heels of the mysterious mare. The builder, left without his supernatural helper, fell behind schedule. Stone by stone, the wall's progress slowed. The gods, cautiously optimistic, counted the days. The season's end approached. The builder, frustrated, desperate, worked alone, but without the stallion. Impossible. The final day arrived. The wall unfinished, the contract void, and then the builder's true nature revealed. He wasn't merely a skilled craftsman. He was a giant in disguise, a Jotun, one of their ancient enemies. Furious, exposed, the builder lashed out. But now, the gods were prepared. Thor, ever impatient for action, stepped forward. Mjolnir, the hammer of thunder, struck. The giant fell. The wall remained, massive, unbreakable, but unpaid for. A victory, albeit an awkward one. As for Loki, his distraction had consequences. The gods whispered of his absence, of the strange tale that followed. For in time, Loki returned, but not alone. At his side, a peculiar foal, 8-legged, gray, swift as the wind, Sleipnir, Odin's future steed, born of the mare's distraction and Loki's unique situation. A complicated story, a tedious project, a wall that saved Asgard. And as you relax, drifting quietly into sleep, think on this. Even the strongest walls are built on patience, mistakes, and the unexpected consequences of clever distractions. When the dust settled, the wall stood, massive, unbroken, encircling Asgard, like a silent guardian. The gods, proud as ever, inspected the work. Stone fitted so perfectly, not even the wind could slip through the cracks. A barrier against giants, chaos, and whatever lurked beyond the 9 realms. They had their defense, their peace of mind, but few cared to remember how it came to be. No songs praised the builder. No feasts celebrated the tedious process of stone stacking. No one carved Loki's name into the foundation, at least, not with admiration. Yet the wall remained, long after the builder's bones turned to dust, long after the arguments faded from memory, long after even Sleipnir, Loki's strange eight-legged foal, carried Odin across realms. The wall was reliable, not glorious, not exciting, but quietly essential. It held back the wild forces of the Ginnungagap. It defined Asgard's borders. It gave the gods the illusion of control. But illusions, like walls, only last so long. Ragnarök loomed, the inevitable unraveling of order. The wolves would chase the sun and moon. The serpent would rise from the sea. The giants would march, and even the great wall of Asgard would fall. But for now, in the long stretch of years between creation and catastrophe, it stood, unaffected by time, uncelebrated by songs, patient, immovable. Perhaps that's how true strength often exists, not in loud battles or shining halls, but in stone, in steady labor, in quiet tasks no one volunteers for. The gods, of course, moved on, their pride intact, their borders secured, their tendency to ignore the lessons of patience unchanged. And Loki, he never quite lived down the incident. Though Sleipnir became Odin's prized steed, whispers followed the trickster of shapeshifting, of consequences, of walls built and promises broken. But the wall, it never spoke, it simply remained. And as your body rests now, still and quiet, think of those unseen walls in your own life, the boundaries, the routines, the quiet structures you rarely notice until they're gone. And when they crumble, only then do we remember how essential they were all along. Every grand myth needs a centerpiece, a sword, a hero, a golden treasure. But in Norse mythology, the most important thing isn't flashy. It doesn't glow. It doesn't roar. It grows. Yggdrasil, the world tree, ancient, vast, utterly overlooked. Its branches stretch across the 9 realms. Its roots burrow deeper than memory. Its trunk holds everything together. Without it, the gods have no halls. The giants have no wilderness. The humans have no Midgard. The realms fall apart. And yet, few songs celebrate Yggdrasil. No one boasts of planting it. No one tells stories of tending its bark or pruning its leaves. It simply exists, quiet, essential. But where did it come from? Its origins aren't loud or dramatic. There was no thunderous birth, no cosmic explosion, just the slow, steady unfolding of existence. In the beginning, there was Ginnungagap, the yawning void, endless nothing, silence so deep it hummed. Then came Niflheim, cold, dark, icy rivers flowing beneath frozen mists, and Muspelheim, fire, heat, molten rivers blazing across the void. Where ice met fire, the first drops formed. Life stirred, slowly, reluctantly. From that meeting of opposites, the first being emerged, Ymir, the primordial giant, and with him, the cow, Audhumla. Life strange, quiet, unexpected. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't fast. It took time. Ymir fed. Audhumla licked ice blocks, uncovering Buri, the ancestor of the gods. And from these tedious beginnings, the world began to take shape. But structure, stability, that required something more. And so, from the fabric of existence itself. Yggdrasil grew. No one planted it, no one claimed credit. It simply appeared. A single ash tree, vast, timeless, unimpressed by gods and giants alike. Its branches held the heavens. Its trunk cradled the earth. Its roots tangled deep into the unseen places. 3 primary roots, each reaching a different realm. One to Asgard, the home of the gods. One to Jotunheimtha, land of the giants. And one to Niflheim, world of ice and the wellspring of fate itself. The roots were practical, anchoring everything, binding the realms together. And beneath those roots, wells, springs, mysteries, too quiet for song and too tedious for most to notice. Urdar Brunn, the well of fate, where the Norns, the weavers of destinies, spinning the threads of life and time. Mimir's Brunner, the well of wisdom, guarded by Mimir, the wise one whose quiet knowledge outlasted even his own body. And Hvergelmir, bubbling spring at the icy root, source of all waters. The gods understood the importance, vaguely, but Yggdrasil was background. It didn't demand attention. It didn't wage war. It simply held everything together until the day it started to decay. But that's a quiet disaster for another time. For now, as your breathing slows, steady and calm, imagine the roots beneath you, silent, hidden, but holding your entire world together, whether you notice or not. If you ask most people how the world will end, they speak of fire, floods, war, a roaring, dramatic finish. But often, it starts smaller, quieter, rotten roots, pests no one notices, tiny problems ignored till they aren't. Yggdrasil, the mighty world tree, was no exception. The gods liked to pretend the tree was eternal, but even eternal things erode. The first signs were subtle. A creaking branch here, a fading leaf there, a whisper of decay along the roots. Most ignored it. After all, Yggdrasil still stood. Its trunk, massive, its branches, wide, its roots, tangled and deep. But beneath the bark, trouble stirred. First, there were the creatures. A squirrel, not a fearsome beast, not a monstrous serpent, just a squirrel, Ratatoskr, a nimble, irritating, little thing, darting along Yggdrasil's trunk, carrying insults, spreading gossip. Between the eagle at the top and the serpent at the bottom, Ratatoskr ferried messages, none of them kind. The insults gnawed at pride, the tension gnawed at peace. But Ratatoskr wasn't the real problem. Further below, coiled among the roots, lived Nihgr, a dragon, a serpent, a slow, patient predator. Nihgr didn't T-roar, didn't strike with fury. Instead, it chewed, gnawed, endlessly, at the roots of Yggdrasil, at the quiet foundation of the 9 realms. The tree suffered wormholes, appeared, bark peeled, sap bled like a slow, sticky tear. The gods noticed. Eventually Odin, perched at the top, watching. The Norns, weaving fate at the roots, frowning Mimir, whispering from his well of wisdom. But Yggdrasil still stood. So they delayed, ignored, focused on more dramatic concerns. It wasn't glamorous to tend to roots. It wasn't thrilling to patch, bark, or prune branches. The work was tedious, necessary, and so, as gods often do, they neglected the boring tasks. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, the decay spread. Some say the Norns watered Yggdrasil with sacred waters daily. that their efforts kept the rot at bay, that their weaving held the realms together. But even their vigilance couldn't stop inevitability, the pests, the gnawing, tiny, tedious, constant. Like most disasters, it wasn't a sudden, fiery end. It was slow, silent, a quiet collapse, gathering pace. And as your thoughts settle now, your breath steady, your body heavy with sleep, think of those quiet cracks in the world, the ones no one notices until they're too wide to ignore. In stories, endings are often loud. Blades clash, worlds burn, gods fall, but sometimes the end begins with a creak, a groan, the soft, slow breaking of something ancient. Yggdrasil, the world tree, the quiet backbone of the 9 realms, was no exception. It stood for ages, silent, strong, overlooked, but nothing lasts forever. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, wasn't just battles and monsters. It was the unraveling of everything. And at the heart of it, the tree. While gods prepared for war, while giants gathered, while wolves chased the sun and moon, Yggdrasil groaned. The roots, chewed hollow by Niflheim, the bark, scarred by time and neglect. The branches, heavy with the weight of forgotten promises, and still most didn't notice, or didn't care, or hoped the tree would hold a little longer. But as the serpent Jormungandr rose from the sea, as Fenrir's chains shattered, as the sky split and the world burned, the tree cracked, branches snapped, roots tore free. The quiet foundation crumbled. It wasn't a glorious fall. It wasn't marked by songs or poems. It was inevitable. The consequence of forgotten care, of tiny, ignored problems. The 9 realms shuddered, collapsed, broke apart. But even in the fall, hope lingered. Some say, after Ragnarök, when the ashes cooled, a new world grew, from the remnants, from quiet survivors, hidden among the roots. New shoots, new branches, a tree reborn. Perhaps it wasn't as grand, perhaps it wasn't as strong, but it was enough. Because even when mighty things fall, life persists, quietly, patiently, without fanfare. And so, as your breathing deepens, your thoughts slowing into sleep, remember the strongest things, the trees, the routines, the unnoticed roots beneath your life can fall, but from quiet places they can also grow again. Before paper calendars, before clocks ticking on the wall, there was confusion. In the ancient north, where winter lingered like an unwelcome guest and summer vanished in the blink of an eye, time wasn't so easy to measure. The Norse, for all their bravery and boasting, struggled with a problem as old as civilization itself. How do you keep track of time when the seasons don't cooperate? The sun would vanish for months. The night would stretch endlessly. Then, suddenly, summer returned in a burst brief, bright, gone again. It made planning complicated. Harvests, raids, feasts, all of it depended on knowing roughly what day or, at least, what month it was. But calendars require patience, observation, and frankly, some guesswork. The Norse weren't mathematicians. They didn't have astronomers with precise instruments. But they had something else. They had common sense and boredom. Long winters, stuck indoors, staring at the snow. What better time to try and make sense of the seasons? And so, bit by bit, they created a calendar, not precise, not perfect, but good enough. They divided the year simply, 2 seasons, summer, winter. Anything more complicated, unnecessary, or impossible. Summer was the time for sailing, trading, raiding, and planting. Winter, surviving, huddling near fires, telling stories, sharpening weapons, waiting. But within those seasons, they tried to carve out more detail. They named months after practical things: haymaking, harvests, snowfall, the return of light. Lacking a written language for most of their early history, they relied on memory, on the moon's cycles, on the feel of the land beneath their feet. Did the rivers thaw? Did the animals return? Did the snow soften beneath the sun? That was their calendar, fluid, imperfect, completely at the mercy of nature's whims. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And so, across farms and fjords, fishing villages to chieftains' halls, the Norse counted their days as best they could, not with ticking clocks, but with sheep birthing lambs, with the first frost, with the return of migratory birds. Boring, perhaps, but essential. Without those rough guesses at time, there would be no planning, no safe journeys, no feasts to mark the turning of the year, just uncertainty. And as your body rests now, still and steady, think of the quiet rhythm beneath your life, the steady, unnoticed ways time passes, marked not by alarms, but by the world quietly turning, as it always has. If you've ever tried to organize a group event, you know how hard it is to get everyone to agree on a date. Now imagine trying to do that without a proper calendar. That was life for the Norse. Summer was short, winter was long. Everything in between, a blurry, unpredictable mess. But even so, the Norse needed to mark time for planting, for harvesting, for raiding, for feasting. So they turned to the sky. The moon, slow and steady, became their guide. Its waxing and waning was the closest thing they had to a reliable clock. Lunar months, rough, inexact, better than nothing. The Norse divided the year into two halves, but within those, they counted the moon's cycles to mark months. They gave them practical names. Gormanu, your slaughter month, when livestock were butchered for winter. Harpa, the month, welcoming summer, when the days finally stretched. Hyenir, haymaking, when the fields were busy and backs ached, and so on. It wasn't an exact science. It wasn't even consistent across regions. One village might be preparing for harvest, another still waiting for the snow to clear, but the moon kept them roughly aligned. Of course, there was a problem. Lunar months don't perfectly match the solar year. The moon goes through its phases about 12 times a year, leaving a little extra time unaccounted for. Over the years, seasons drifted. Summer celebrations crept into colder months. Harvests felt mistimed, the Norse noticed. And, in their practical, slightly bored way, they adjusted. They occasionally inserted a leap month, a quiet correction. No grand announcements, just an extra stretch of time slipped in to realign the calendar with the seasons. Not precise, not perfect, but enough. Because for the Norse, time wasn't about counting hours. It was about survival, knowing when to sail before storms returned, knowing when to plant before frost bit the earth, knowing when to feast before winter locked the doors. Time was practical. No temples to mark the equinox, no stone circles tracking the stars, just eyes to the sky, hands in the soil, and guesses, educated, imperfect, necessary. And so the Norse calendar persisted, not carved in stone, but whispered in tradition. passed down, quietly, like so much of life in the frozen north. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy, with rest, imagine the quiet, ancient rhythm beneath your days, guided not by seconds and alarms, but by the slow, steady patience of the moon. The calendar of the Norse wasn't carved in stone, it wasn't printed, it wasn't recited from the steps of grand temples. It existed, quietly, patiently, passed from mouth to ear, from parent to child, from farmer to fisherman. The year turned, not with fireworks, but with frost, with the first buds on stubborn trees, with lambs born in crowded sheds, with the whisper of thawing streams. The Norse didn't debate dates. In heated councils, they noticed the small things, the things modern life teaches us to ignore: a shift in the wind, the weight of the snow, the cry of returning birds, the changing feel of soil beneath tired hands. Those were their clocks, their calendars, their steady, unnoticed reminders that time was always moving. And with each quiet turn of the year came quiet rituals. The BLT sacrifices offered to the gods at practical times, before winter's chill deepened, before summer's fleeting warmth arrived. No one marked a specific day with certainty. They simply felt when it was time, and when time wavered. When winter clung too long, or summer arrived too soon, they adjusted, added a month, delayed a feast, shifted as nature shifted. Their calendar wasn't rigid. It bent like branches under snow. It swayed like long grass in coastal winds. It whispered rather than shouted. Of course, by the time Christianity arrived, bringing written dates and imported festivals, the Norse calendar faded. It was replaced by official months, by saints' days, by pages and parchment, and predictable dates. But the land remembered, in the far-flung farms, on the edges of the fjords, in quiet fishing villages. There, the old ways lingered, the feel of time, the guesswork, the patient, unnoticed turning of the year. And even now, beneath our neat calendars and glowing screens, it's still there. The earth turning, the seasons shifting, not perfectly measured, but always present. And as your breathing deepens, your mind softening into quiet rest, consider, the world rarely announces its changes. Time turns softly, seasons shift silently, and all we can do is quietly keep count and carry on. In the beginning, the gods did what gods do best. They argued, they boasted, and inevitably, they fought. But even divine wars, loud as they may be, can get exhausting. The Aesir, the warrior gods of Asgard, proud, battle-hardened, quick to anger, and the Vanir, gods of fertility, prosperity, and nature, powerful, proud in their own quiet way. Two tribes of gods, both convinced they were right, both unwilling to back down the cause of the war. Like many wars, complicated, petty, and largely forgotten. Some say it began with Gulveig, a mysterious Vanir figure, a practitioner of searing, ancient, unsettling magic the Aesir distrusted. She arrived in Asgard, gold-hungry and unbothered by the Aesir's suspicious stares. She thrived, she manipulated, she unsettled them. The Aesir, in their pride, tried to destroy her. They burned her, not once, not twice, 3 times, but each time she returned, alive, untouched, more defiant than before. It was a message, a challenge, a spark. The Vanir took offense. The Aesir refused to apologize, and so war, It wasn't the grand, world-ending war of Ragnarök. It was slower, messier, tedious, skirmishes, raids, grudges simmering beneath the surface. No one gained ground, no one truly won. Years passed, weapons dulled, tempers cooled slightly, resources thinned, patience ran out. And so, reluctantly, the gods did something unexpected. They negotiated. Imagine that. Gods who command storms and shape fates, sitting down, talking, bargaining, bickering over terms like weary diplomats. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't exciting, but it was necessary. The details were hashed out in endless, tiresome meetings. Who owed what? Who apologized first? Who married whom to seal the deal? But slowly, a truce emerged. The Aesir and the Vanir, enemies, turned. Reluctant allies. The war ended not with a bang, but with tired gods shaking hands figuratively and hoping they could stand each other long enough to avoid another fight. A small victory for patience, a bigger victory for boredom over bloodshed. And as your breathing steadies, your eyes heavy with sleep, think on this: even the proudest, most powerful beings eventually get tired of fighting. And when they do, progress, however tedious, quietly begins. Diplomacy is rarely grand. It's not soaring speeches. It's not poetic oaths. It's awkward, uncomfortable, often. DAMP. And in the case of the Aesir and Vanir, it involved spitting in a pot. After years of pointless war, both sides finally agreed. Enough. But agreeing to stop fighting is easy. Trusting each other afterward, far harder. So, the gods, in their infinite and sometimes questionable wisdom, devised a solution. They gathered both tribes, proud, suspicious, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. To seal the truce, they each spat into a single pot, one by one. No ceremony. No magic words, just spit. It sounds ridiculous. But bodily fluids, apparently, carried significant weight in divine negotiations. From that mingled spit, they created something remarkable. A being, a man, Kvasir, born of the combined essence of both tribes. Kvasir embodied wisdom, not loud, boastful wisdom, but quiet. A teacher, a living reminder that even bitter enemies can, through shared patience and shared spit, create something worthwhile. But the truce wasn't just symbolic, it required action. As part of the agreement, both tribes exchanged hostages. Aesir to Vanir, Vanir to Aesir, a quiet shuffle of important figures designed to build trust. From the Vanir came Durd, god of sea and wind, practical, respected, bored of endless war. And his children, Freyja, radiant goddess of love, desired by all, Freyja, god of fertility and prosperity. They left their homeland, settled in Asgard, became part of the Asir's world. Over time, lines blurred. Tribes merged. Old grudges softened beneath practical alliances. Of course, the gods never truly let go of their pride. Tension lingered. Occasional bickering flared. But outright war, it faded, replaced by uneasy peace, by tedious diplomacy, by the quiet, practical work of building unity. One reluctant step at a time. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't dramatic, it was enough. And as your breathing slows now, your body still and heavy with rest, consider, sometimes peace isn't forged in fire, but in small, awkward moments, in shared spit, exchanged promises, and the quiet, patient work of learning to coexist. Over time, the Assyria-Vanir War became history, a quiet footnote in the endless stories of the gods. The bards preferred louder tales, Thor's hammer strikes, Loki's schemes, Odin's endless search for wisdom, but tucked quietly beneath those tales. The alliance endured. Vanir gods lived among the Aesir. Freya, radiant and mysterious, taught them seer magic, old as the earth itself. Injured, calmed their seas, guiding their ships safely home. Freyr blessed their fields, ensuring crops ripened and harvests came. The two tribes blended, slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. Generations passed. The line between Aesir and Vanir blurred like mist over frozen fields, and yet the roots of the truce held, invisible, quiet, essential. Without that tedious agreement, without the swapped hostages, the shared magic, the mingled spit Osgard might have fallen long before Ragnarök ever arrived. Because while gods love to fight, even they learned, sometimes, survival means compromise. Peace isn't exciting, but it lasts longer than war. And so, as battles raged elsewhere, as giants schemed, as prophecies whispered of the end, the Aesir and Vanir, bound by quiet necessity, held their uneasy alliance. It didn't make the songs, but it made history. And when Ragnarök finally came, when swords clashed, when wolves devoured the sun, when the realms shook, even then the Aesir and Vanir stood side by side, allies, not because they liked each other, but because centuries of tedious cooperation taught them they needed each other. Perhaps that's the truest kind of peace. Not love, but quiet, patient understanding that, like it or not, we're in this together. And as your body settles now, heavy with sleep, consider the loudest moments in history often rest upon the quiet, boring agreements no one celebrates, the unseen truces that quietly hold everything together until they don't. When people tell stories of the gods, they speak of battles, storms, oaths, worlds ending in fire and ice. But one of the most enduring legacies of Norse myth, a drink, sticky, sweet, mildly intoxicating, mead, the drink of poets, the fuel of skalds, the quiet, necessary lubricant of long, cold winters. Its invention, not glamorous, not heroic, in fact, borderline disgusting. It all began, like many things among the gods, with an argument, a war, an uneasy truce. The Aesir and Vanir, having finally grown bored of fighting, sealed their alliance by spitting into a pot. From that mingled saliva, they created Kvasira, being of pure wisdom. Kvasira wandered the realms, quiet, thoughtful, answering questions no one else could. He was not flashy, not loud, but wise beyond measure. Unfortunately, wisdom makes enemies, and curiosity, as always, leads to trouble. Two dwarves, Fjalar and Galar, had a plan, clever, morbid, efficient. They killed Kvasir, drained his blood, mixed it with honey. The result? A golden, potent liquid, the mead of poetry. It wasn't meant for drunken brawls. It wasn't for toasting victories. It was refined. A drink that granted the gift of words, the inspiration for poets and thinkers. Of course, like anything valuable, it didn't stay hidden for long. The mead passed from hand to hand, giants, eventually, the gods. Odin, ever the seeker of knowledge, desired it, not for parties, but for power, for the quiet, dangerous magic of words. But before Odin's schemes could unfold, before the mead's fate was sealed, its origins, quietly fermented in barrels, forgotten by most, known only to those who understood in a cold, harsh world sometimes. It's the small comforts that matter most. A sip of mead, a whispered poem, a quiet moment by the hearth. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with rest, remember, not all legends begin with thunder. Some start with honey, spit, and the slow, sticky work of making life bearable. Odin was not a god who liked to sit still. Wisdom, power, secrets, he chased them all, relentlessly, quietly, often inconveniently for everyone else. When whispers of the mead of poetry reached him, he couldn't resist. A drink that could gift flawless words, inspiration, the power to sway minds with language alone. Odin wanted it. But of course, it wasn't simple. It never was. The mead had passed from the dwarves to a giant named Suttung. The story was as tedious as it was predictable. The dwarves caused trouble. Suttung, angry and practical, took the mead as compensation. He stored it away, hidden, locked in a mountain, guarded not by warriors, but by his daughter, Gunnlod, alone in the cavern, watching over 3 clay vessels filled with golden mead. Odin's task, steal it, but not with swords or lightning, with patience, and a series of increasingly awkward deceptions. First, he found his way to the home of Bogi Suttung's brother, a farmer, not particularly clever, but useful. Odin disguised himself as a laborer, offered to help Bogi with his work, plowed fields, stacked hay, endured the dull, back-breaking rhythm of farm life. For an entire summer, the Allfather, the god of war, the seeker of cosmic wisdom, spent months farming, not dramatic, not heroic, just tedious. But patience pays. After the harvest, Odin convinced Bogi to help him. They drilled a hole into the mountain where the mead was kept, a small opening, a narrow chance. Odin, master of shapeshifting, slipped inside as a snake, coiled through the hole, slithered into the dark cavern. There he found Gunnlod, alone, guarding the mead, perhaps bored, perhaps longing for company. Odin obliged. For 3 nights, more than words, and in return she allowed him 3 sips of the mead of poetry. But Odin never does things halfway. Each sip drained an entire vessel. All the mead gone. In an instant, he transformed into an eagle, powerful, fast, determined. With the stolen mead in his belly, he flew home to Asgard. Suttung, furious, gave chase also in eagle form. But Odin, fueled by cunning and mead, escaped. Back in Asgard, he regurgitated the mead into waiting containers. Yes, the details of divine theft are rarely glamorous. Some mead spilled fell to Midgard, those drops, the source of mediocre poetry, the gift accidentally shared with humanity, the rest reserved for gods, poets, and those rare mortals worthy of true inspiration. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with sleep, consider, sometimes the greatest treasures aren't won in battle, but earned through patience, tedious work, and the quiet understanding of how words can change the world. The mead of poetry did not spark wars. It didn't shatter mountains or raise armies. It lingered, quietly, patiently, stored in Asgard, sipped by whispered through the halls of kings and wandering poets alike. Its origins, messy, undignified, forgotten by most. Few remembered the pot of spit. Fewer still the dwarves scheming. Almost no one thought of Odin, disguised as a farmhand, toiling in sun and soil just to earn his prize. Instead, they marveled at the words, the songs, the poems that seemed to flow effortlessly from inspired tongues. The mead worked, but not always. Those stray drops, spilled in Odin's haste, made their way to Midgard, to the fields, the forests, the hearth fires of ordinary people. And with them came bad poetry, awkward speeches, uninspired songs sung too loud at late-night feasts. The gods blamed the spill. Humans, being human, blamed each other. But the truth, the mead never promised perfection, just the possibility. The possibility that, with the right words, a battle could be avoided, a lover could be won, a legacy could be carved, not with swords, but with syllables. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it endured. Mead, in the practical sense, also endured. Not just the magical brew, but the drink itself, honey, water, time, fermented together, in barrels and pots, stored through harsh winters, shared at quiet gatherings, a simple drink, a small comfort in an unpredictable world. It wasn't about drunken revelry, though there was plenty of that. It was about survival, community, the warmth of a fire, the steady hum of voices, the slow, unnoticed passing of dark northern nights. And so, the mead of poetry remained. A reminder that history isn't always written with swords. Sometimes, it's whispered in verses, shared over a cup, and quietly, gently, passed along to those willing to listen. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with rest, remember, the greatest changes rarely arrive with thunder. They seep in, like mead, into clay vessels, slow, steady, and almost unnoticed. When most people think of Vikings, they imagine ships slicing through cold northern seas, shields shining, axes raised, plundered gold glittering in the distance. But for every Viking raider, there were dozens who never left their land, never sailed beyond their fjord, never held a sword with glory in mind. They were farmers, the quiet, exhausted backbone of Norse society. Farming in Scandinavia wasn't glamorous, it wasn't heroic, it was survival. And mostly, it was rocks. The soil was thin, the seasons short, the land stubborn. Each year began the same way, with heavy boots crunching over frozen ground, with tired eyes scanning the fields for stones that winter's frost had pushed to the surface. Every spring, the earth betrayed them. New rocks appeared, old ones shifted. Endless, relentless obstacles to planting. And so the first task of the year, gathering rocks, dragging them to the edges of fields, stacking them into low, crooked walls, year after year. It wasn't glorious, it was exhausting and necessary. Then came plowing, not with machines, with wooden plows, dragged by stubborn oxen, or, for the poorer farmers, by hand. The soil resisted, roots tangled, mud clung, frost lingered, but crops had to grow. Barley, oats, rye, hardy grains, suited for harsh climates and harsher stomachs. Vegetables, too, cabbage, onions, turnips, not for feasts, for survival, for filling empty bellies during the long, dark winters to come. And always the livestock, sheep, cows, goats, each animal a lifeline, wool for warmth, milk for sustenance, meat carefully rationed. But even tending animals was tedious. mending fences, repairing shelters, dragging water, chasing strays. There were no shortcuts, no quiet seasons, only the endless rhythm of rural life. Most Viking farmers never saw distant shores, never raided monasteries, never earned songs sung by fires, but their quiet, thankless labor fed families, built communities, held the fragile fabric of Norse society together. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with rest, think of them, the nameless, forgotten farmers who fought not with swords, but with frost, stone, and stubborn earth, and in doing so, quietly shaped the world. The chores never ended. There were no weekends, no holidays except those the gods demanded, and even then, the animals still needed feeding. The Viking farmer's life was a steady, exhausting loop of work. Sunrise, milk the cows, tend the goats, gather eggs, if you were lucky enough to have chickens. Next came the fields, always the fields. Weeds pulled by hand, crops watched with anxious eyes for signs of frost, pests, or disease, and the fences. They always seemed to lean or break, or vanish entirely under snowdrifts. Fences meant the difference between your sheep grazing safely or wandering off into the woods, never to return. In summer, there was hay to cut, hay that must be dried just right, too damp, and it rotted, too dry, and it crumbled, and every stalk of it mattered when winter's hunger crept in. Firewood, stacked high, split early, because once winter arrived, you weren't going into the forest unless you wanted frostbite or worse. And then there were the buildings, the longhouse, the barn, the storage sheds. Wood rotted, roofs sagged, thatch needed patching, walls leaned. Repairs were constant, tedious, and ignored only by those who didn't mind freezing to death. Inside, the work never stopped either. Wool spun into yarn, cloth woven, stitched, mended, tools sharpened, nets repaired, barrels checked for leaks, meals prepared, porridge, stews, dried, fish, simple, necessary, dull. Children learned early, not through lessons, but through tasks. Fetch water, chase chickens, stack firewood. Help, always help, because idle hands were a luxury no farm could afford. And in winter, the chores slowed, but never stopped. Snow piled high, food stores checked daily, animals huddled indoors, their breath clouding the air, manure shoveled, ice broken for water. The dark days stretched endlessly. The fire crackled, and outside the world slept. But the farmer never truly rested, because next season lurked just beyond the snowdrifts. Next year's rocks waited beneath the thawing soil, and as your breathing deepens, your body finally allowed its rest. Imagine the quiet, thankless rhythm of those who came before, who traded glory for grit, and in doing so, kept the world quietly turning. The longhouse was no castle. It was practical, cramped, dim, built from timber, turf, and hard-earned patience. Inside, life settled into the same steady rhythm as the fields outside. The hearth crackled at the center, smoke curling up toward the rafters. Meat hung drying overhead. Tools leaned against walls. Sleeping spaces lined the edges. Men, women, children, even animals sometimes, all sharing the same breath warmed air, privacy, a luxury no one expected. Winter settled heavy over the land. Darkness lingered, the days short, the nights endless. Outside, snow buried the fields. The earth slept, The world hushed beneath ice and cold wind. Inside, the work continued. Cloth woven by firelight, nets mended with stiff, calloused fingers, stories whispered to pass the hours, old sagas, family tales, warnings of the gods' whims and the giants lurking. It wasn't entertainment, it was survival. The stories kept fear at bay, kept the mind steady while the wind howled, and always the quiet counting of supplies, barrels of grain, dried fish, salted meat. If the stores ran low before spring, there would be hunger, or worse, the quiet anxiety of winter never truly left. But the Viking farmer was stubborn, cautious, practical. Spring would come, the snow would recede, the rocks would rise again in the fields, and the cycle would begin anew. No songs would be sung for these men and women. No sagas carved their names into memory, but their quiet, brutal work fed the raiders, clothed the traders, built the ships, raised the children. Without them, there were no heroes, no explorers, no legends, just frozen earth. And so, year after year, stone after stone, crop after crop, they endured, unseen, uncelebrated, essential. And as your breathing slows now, your body heavy with rest, remember, history remembers the swords, but forgets the soil-stained hands that made them possible, the farmers, patient and weary, who quietly held the world together. The Viking longship inspires images of sleek hulls slicing through dark northern seas, fearless warriors, unstoppable raids, the distant thunder of oars against water. But before those ships conquered rivers and coastlines, someone had to build them, and that wasn't nearly as exciting. It started, like most things, with trees, tall, sturdy, reluctant to give themselves up to axe and saw. The forests of Scandinavia were rich with pine, oak, ash-strong woods, each chosen with quiet care. Felling the right tree wasn't about speed, it was patience, an eye for straight trunks, the grain of the wood, the hidden flaws beneath bark and branch. The axe was sharp, the work exhausting. Each tree brought down with slow, steady swings, not heroic, just necessary. Then came shaping. No sawmills, no assembly lines, just hands, blades, and hours of quiet, methodical labor. Planks were split, not sawn, along the grain of the wood. This preserved strength, kept the hull light, flexible, yet tough enough to endure endless waves. Iron nails, precious, often replaced with wooden pegstring, nails hammered into place, swollen with water to hold the planks tight. The Kiatha spine of the ship was carved first, long, sturdy, the foundation upon which the entire vessel depended. Every curve mattered. Too flat, the ship dragged. Too round, it wobbled. Balance wasn't a luxury, it was survival. No blueprints, just generations of knowledge passed quietly. From hands to hands, the ribs bent into shape. The planks overlapped clinker-built, creating strength through layered design. Pitch and tar sealed the seams. Animal hair or moss filled the gaps. Sails were stitched by hand. Wool, thick and heavy, dyed deep red or left natural, stretched over masts carefully shaped from pine. Oars carved, balanced, sanded, smooth. Hours of back-breaking work so rowers could glide across icy waters. And when the ship was finally ready, it wasn't just a vessel. It was survival, mobility, trade, escape, opportunity. But no one sang songs for the builders. No sagas carved their names into history. Yet, without their quiet, unglamorous labor, the world beyond the fjords remained forever out of reach. And as your breathing slows, your body still and resting, imagine the quiet rhythm of axes, hammers, and patient hands, building not just ships, but the possibility of distant horizons. Building a ship was only half the battle. The other half, keeping it afloat. The sea, for all its beauty, is a quiet destroyer. Salt, water, waves, time, they eat at wood, warp planks, rot the seams. So, before any grand voyage, before the first oar hit the water, came testing, not dramatic, not thrilling, just necessary. The freshly built ship was eased into the shallows. It creaked, it shifted. Water seeped through gaps unseen during construction. The builders listened, watched, checked every seam, tightened tree nails, reapplied pitch, removed stray bits of moss, and replaced them with fresh caulking. A leaky ship wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. The hull had to flex, but not crack. The mast had to stand firm, but not rigid. The oars had to glide smoothly, perfectly balanced. Every fault, however small, meant repairs. Days of scraping, sanding, patching, small, tedious tasks that no one sang about, but that quietly kept entire crews alive. Once at sea, the work never stopped. Sails tore, ropes frayed, planks shifted, under strain. At every stop on distant beaches, beside quiet fjords, at bustling ports repairs were made. Tar heated over fires, pegs replaced, ropes retied. The sea punished complacency. Neglect the ship, and it neglected you in return, often at the worst possible moment. Even successful voyages ended with more work. Hulls scraped clean of barnacles, seams resealed, oars repaired, splinters sanded smooth. The longship was not immortal, but cared for, maintained with quiet diligence. It lasted, voyage after voyage, season after season, a floating lifeline, a stubborn, sea-battered testament to patience and craftsmanship. And as your breathing slows now, your body heavy with rest, think of this: the boldest journeys across oceans are only possible because of forgotten hands, quiet repairs, and the slow, tedious work that keeps a ship afloat. The sagas remember the warriors, the explorers, the kings whose ships sliced through northern seas like knives through silk. But the shipwrights, the builders, the ones who labored in forests and workshops, far from glory, their names drifted away like smoke from a hearth, and yet their quiet work changed the world. Without them, there were no raids, no bold crossings to Greenland or even to the shores of North America. Every plank, every tree nail, every sail, stitched by calloused fingers, they were quiet acts of expansion. A single longship, meticulously crafted, could carry warriors across oceans, traders to foreign markets, families to new unknown settlements. The Norse didn't spread by magic or myth alone. They spread by timber, by pitch, by slow, steady craftsmanship. The forests thinned, the shorelines filled with keels, pulled onto pebble beaches. New worlds opened because someone quietly, tediously built the ships to reach them. And even as those ships decayed, rotted, and sank beneath waves, their influence remained. Settlements, trade routes, names etched into maps, legends carried not by gods, but by planks of wood floating stubbornly across the cold sea. It wasn't glorious work. It wasn't remembered in song. But without it, the boldest Norse tales never left the shore. And as your breathing slows, your body sinking deeper into rest, remember, history sails on grand voyages. Shipwright at a time when Eric the Red sailed west from Iceland. He wasn't seeking paradise, he was seeking space. An exile, banished for murder, like so many before him, he drifted across rough northern seas. Icy winds, gray waves, the haunting unknown beyond the horizon. And then land. Massive, cold, wild, Greenland. The name, clever marketing. Eric knew survival required settlers. Settlers needed hope. Greenland sounded promising. The truth. Rugged mountains, endless ice, sparse. But Norse hearts were stubborn too. By the late 10th century, they came. Farmers, shepherds, dreamers, outlaws. They carved small settlements along the fjords, built turf houses, grazed sheep and cattle, harvested seals and fish. It wasn't easy. The soil shallow, the winters brutal, the growing season brief, but they endured. Because that's what Norse settlers did. The eastern settlement and the western settlements, small clusters of homesteads clinging to Greenland's edges, far from Norway, far from Iceland, but connected. For now, trade ships arrive, irregular but welcome, bringing tools, cloth, iron, taking away hides, ivory from walrus tusks, the occasional prized polar bear. The settlements grew. Stone churches rose on frozen ground. Graves filled quietly over time. Life settled into its steady, exhausting rhythm. Families survived. For generations, it worked. Not gloriously, not comfortably, but it worked. And yet, beneath the surface, beneath the frozen soil and drifting ice, quiet problems took root. Problems no one sang songs about. Problems that, like frost creeping into cracks, would eventually break everything. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with rest, imagine the quiet beginnings of a forgotten colony, built on stubbornness and hope, slowly edging toward a collapse that no one saw coming. 4 generations, Greenland's Norse settlers, endured. The sea stayed cold, the land stayed unforgiving. But life continued. Cattle grazed the sparse meadows, sheep huddled in turf pens. Hay was cut, dried, and stacked beneath low, windswept roofs. Seals were hunted, walrus tusks traded. New homes rose from stone and sod. But slowly, quietly, the cracks appeared. First, the climate shifted. Not suddenly, not with storms or disasters, just colder. A few weeks less of summer warmth. A few more inches of sea ice creeping into the fjords. The grass thinned. Hay harvests shrank. Livestock suffered. Hunger whispered through the settlements. Trade, once the fragile lifeline to Norway and Iceland, faltered. Fewer ships arrived. Storms made crossings more dangerous. Europe's attention drifted elsewhere toward new markets, new wars, new ambitions. And always, the Inuit, the Thule people, skilled hunters, masters of the Arctic. They arrived quietly, moving down from the north. Their kayaks skimmed the icy waters. Their harpoons found seals, whales, and walrus with ease. They thrived where the Norse struggled. Contact between Norse and Inuit, sparse, awkward, occasionally tense. The Norse, bound to their European farming traditions, resisted adaptation. They clung to cattle, sheep, and old ways, even as the ice crept closer. Meanwhile, the Inuit moved with the seasons, hunted the sea, wore furs suited to the Arctic's bite, built homes from snow and stone that defied the cold. The Norse built stone churches instead, held onto distant memories of Europe, sent envoys, awaited ships that came less and less. And all the while, the winters deepened. The ice grew thicker, the hayfields shrank, the cattle died. But the collapse wasn't sudden. It was tedious, unnoticed at first, a slow erosion of possibility. And as your breathing slows now, your body heavy with rest, imagine a quiet world drifting toward isolation, where the signs of collapse came not with thunder, but with frost creeping into forgotten corners. The final years of Norse Greenland were quiet, not heroic, not marked by battles or grand disasters, just silence. The farm's one stubborn islands of life along the fjord stood empty. Stone walls collapsed under drifting snow. Turf roofs caved in. The fields, never abundant, faded beneath creeping ice. Trade ships stopped coming. Europe, tangled in its own wars and ambitions, forgot the distant colony. The last envoys sent east never returned. Hunger deepened. The remaining cattle starved. Families left behind shuttered doors. Some may have sailed away, others likely stayed, and slowly vanished. The Inuit, skilled in Arctic survival, remained. Their kayaks skimmed the frozen inlets. Their harpoons struck seals and whales beneath gray skies. They adapted, they endured. But the Norse homesteads, they fell silent. By the 15th century, when ships from Iceland or Norway finally returned, they found nothing. Empty houses, crumbled churches, faded runestones, weathered by wind and frost. No battlefields, no graves freshly dug, just absence. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It wasn't swift. It was forgotten. And in the centuries that followed, stories of Viking Greenland drifted into myth, a footnote in sagas, a curiosity in maps, a reminder that stubbornness alone cannot defy a changing world. The Inuit thrived, the Norse faded. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with sleep, consider, history remembers bold arrivals, but often forgets quiet departures. And sometimes, the world simply moves on, leaving behind only wind, ice, and stories whispered by those who adapted and those who did not. Viking society conjures images of warriors, axes, but beneath the raids and legends was something quieter, older, arguably more important. The thing, not a monster, not a treasure, just an assembly, a meeting. And like most important things in history, it wasn't born in fire and glory. It was built, slowly, carefully, boringly. At its heart, the thing was simple. Free men, landowners, farmers, chieftains, gathered, they argued, they voted, they decided. Where? On patches of flat ground, open fields, rocky hillsides, places that were easy to reach, hard to ignore. The land itself shaped the thing. Stones marked boundaries. Large boulders served as speakers' platforms. Sometimes wooden poles, hazel poles, were driven into the soil, outlining the assembly space. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't efficient, but it worked. Weeks before the thing, messengers traveled between homesteads. news spread. Bring your disputes, bring your witnesses, bring your patience. Families packed supplies, food, tents, stories to pass the long, tedious hours. The thing wasn't a quick meeting. It could last days, sometimes weeks, not because of drama, but because reaching consensus among stubborn Norse farmers was slow. The assembly judged crimes, divided land, settled feuds, confirmed chieftains, passed laws. Disputes over grazing land dragged on. Arguments about property boundaries circled endlessly. Witnesses testified. Accused men defended themselves. The law speaker recited the law word for word because writing it down wasn't the custom, his memory, the foundation of justice. And when decisions were finally made, they were binding, public, and often just plain dull. But through this slow, awkward process, order emerged, even among a people known for chaos. As your breathing slows now, your body heavy with rest, consider the boldest societies rest not on swords, but on quiet agreements, patient arguments, and the unremarkable, steady construction of law. The thing wasn't a battlefield, it wasn't a feast, it was both dull and necessary. But that didn't mean it lacked noise. The assembly grounds buzzed with voices, men argued, women gossiped, children played at the edges. Disputes were brought forward like harvest baskets, one after another. A man accused of theft, a neighbor disputing a boundary stone, a widow claiming her rightful inheritance, a merchant protesting unfair treatment. Each case, slow, each witness, questioned in detail. The law speaker standing on his stone robe, heavy with dustras, cited the ancient words of law from memory. Every clause, every exception. There were no written records. The law lived in voices, in tradition, in careful listening. Decisions weren't shouted down from kings. They were argued over, tested, measured by consensus, or, when that failed, by fines, exile, or trial by ordeal. Sometimes, feuds boiled over, tempers flared, fists swung, but most of the time, it was waiting, listening, endless hours under cold northern skies. In between arguments, trade thrived. Markets popped up around the thing. Fish, wool, iron tools, ale flowed freely. Stories traded hands along with silver. For many, the thing wasn't just about justice. It was a rare chance to see neighbors, to exchange news, to arrange marriages, to complain endlessly about the weather. And then, as slowly as it began, the thing dissolved. Cases settled. Punishments decided. Laws confirmed. Disputes mostly put to rest. Families packed up. Cattle herded home. Tents folded. The fields quiet again until next season. Until new disputes. Until the grinding, patient machinery of Norse justice called them back. And as your breathing slows, your body heavy with rest, imagine a world where order isn't forged in battle, but in the steady, tedious hum of arguments, trade, and quiet agreements that quietly hold a society together. The thing left no monuments, no towering statues, no sagas etched in stone, but it shaped Viking life, not with battles, but with agreements and expectations. The assembly wasn't perfect. It was slow, messy, occasionally corrupt, but it prevented worse. Feuds spiraled. Less often, disputes simmered, but didn't always explode. The fragile order of Norse society held together. And it wasn't just about law. The thing was power, quiet, unassuming, rooted in participation. A free farmer, standing on rocky soil, could speak, vote, dispute a chieftain's decision, challenge injustice, all in the open, all with witnesses, all grounded in the old laws passed from voice to voice. There were no royal decrees, no emperor's edicts drifting down from marble halls, just community, however flawed, however frustrating, across Iceland, Norway, the Faroe Islands. The thing shaped settlements, laid foundations for future parliaments, bored generations with its patience, and in its quiet, tedious way, it reminded the Norse that power didn't always swing an axe. Sometimes it raised a hand. Sometimes it recited forgotten clauses of law. Sometimes it simply listened. The thing faded over time. Kings rose. Centralized power expanded, but echoes of the assembly lingered in courts, in councils, in the expectation that somehow even the boldest must answer to someone. And as your breathing slows now, your body heavy with rest, remember, empires rise with battles, but communities endure with quiet agreements, long arguments, and the slow, patient work of building law.